Section 1. The World That Never Sleeps. There is a house on Spooner Street. It sits at the end of a quiet, unremarkable cul-de-sac in the town, Rhode Island. The lawn is a little unkempt. The walls are a shade of white that has seen too many seasons. The front door is a warm, faded red, the kind of red that looks like it was painted with good intentions a long time ago and just never got around to being refreshed. Inside that house, something is always happening. A television is usually on somewhere. Someone is usually arguing about something, or eating something they probably should not be eating, or making a terrible decision that will somehow resolve itself in the next 20 minutes. The refrigerator hums. A dog is somewhere on the property with a glass of wine he does not need. A baby is in his crib, doing things babies have no business doing. And if you stand outside on Spooner Street at night, long after the episode has ended and the credits have rolled, you can almost feel the quiet weight of all the things that have happened in that house over more than 25 years of episodes. Hundreds and hundreds of stories, thousands of jokes, hundreds of characters who wandered in and out, dozens of running gags that started as accidents and became beloved traditions, hidden messages written in blocks, fistfights with a giant chicken that have no satisfying explanation, a baby who may or may not have caused the universe to begin. This is a show that has been on the air since January of 1999. That is a staggering amount of time to spend with any family, fictional or otherwise. And what happens when a story runs that long? When a world is built and rebuilt and added to and occasionally broken down for parts, is that patterns begin to emerge. Some of those patterns were planned. Some of them grew on their own the way ivy grows on a wall, slowly and persistently until one day you notice it has covered everything. And some of them are stranger than anything the writers could have planned. The kind of coincidences and echoes that accumulate when enough people spend enough years paying close enough attention to the same small fictional town. Tonight, we are going to walk through all of it, slowly and thoroughly. We are going to look at the things you noticed on your first watch and the things that took 15 years of returning to an episode to finally see. We are going to trace the logic of a world that operates by its own internal rules, most of which it invented as it went and then had to quietly commit to. We are going to talk about a giant immortal chicken, a baby who created the universe, a dog who kept trying to write a novel, and a man who nearly died on September 11, 2001, and whose survival meant that none of this would have ended when it almost did. This is not a loud video. This is a slow one. Pull whatever you have close around you, get comfortable wherever you are, and let the town wash over you at whatever pace your evening requires. Because the patterns in Family Guy are worth knowing. They are worth sitting with, and the longer you look at them, the more they seem to mean. The town is described in the show as a fictional city in Rhode Island. Seth MacFarlane himself grew up in Kent, Connecticut, and attended the Rhode Island School of Design, which puts him in that specific corner of New England in his formative years. The whole show carries the faint cultural texture of that region. The working-class neighborhoods, the Irish Catholic background of the Griffin family, the kind of small city that is big enough to have a news anchor and a mayor and a brewery, but small enough that everyone seems to know everyone and the same handful of people show up at every event. It is not a glamorous setting. It is not meant to be. There is something deliberately ordinary about this fictional town that makes all the extraordinary things that happen there feel funnier by contrast. The Griffin house itself has become one of the most recognizable addresses in animated television. The layout has shifted somewhat over the years, as the show's background designers occasionally rearranged rooms in ways that did not quite match what had come before. But the essential feeling of the house has stayed consistent, a lived-in American home that is just slightly messier than it should be, filled with furniture that has probably been there too long, where the television is the center of family life, and the kitchen table is where important conversations occasionally happen and are then never followed up on. Brian's water bowl sits somewhere in there. Stewie's playpen is near the living room. Peter's recliner has seen things. It has witnessed years of bad decisions being made with complete sincerity and only mild regret. There is a Drunken Clam pub a short distance away, where Peter Griffin and his friends have spent an amount of time that probably exceeds what any real human being could sustain without consequences. The interior of the Drunken Clam is one of those recurring spaces in the show that feels deeply familiar, even if you cannot always picture the exact details of it. Brown booths, dim lighting, a bar where Cleveland, Joe, and Quagmire have sat through years of Peter's enthusiasms and catastrophes. The Drunken Clam has been destroyed multiple times over the course of the series, and has always returned to something like its original state, which is a metaphor for the show itself more than the writers probably intended. Outside of the town, the show has occasionally ventured into the wider world, and those excursions carry their own kind of weight. But the center of gravity is always Spooner Street. It is always that house. It is always those 6 characters and the strange, warm, sometimes difficult orbit they hold each other in. And it is the patterns within that orbit, the ones that repeat across seasons and sometimes decades, that are worth examining tonight. We are going to start at the most famous of them all. The one that has no satisfying explanation, which keeps repeating anyway, which grew from a single joke in a single episode into something that became a defining feature of the entire series. We are going to start with an expired coupon and what happened because of it. Before we move forward, let me hear from you. Drop a comment below with where you are in the world and what time it is where you are watching from tonight. It does not matter if it is 2 in the morning or early on a Sunday afternoon. Every time zone and every watching condition is equally welcome here. And if you have not subscribed yet, there is no pressure, but it genuinely helps more than you might expect. Okay, let us get into it. A Section 2, an expired coupon and an immortal enemy. It starts with something so small that the smallness of it becomes the point. Sometime before the events of the show began, before we ever saw a single episode of Family Guy, Peter Griffin received a coupon from a giant chicken. We do not know exactly how they met. We do not know what the coupon was for. What we know is that the coupon had already expired when Peter tried to use it, and that when he discovered this, he did not handle it calmly. Peter Griffin, being Peter Griffin, chose to respond to a paperwork disappointment with his fists. And the chicken, being whatever kind of entity this chicken is, chose to fight back. From that moment, a feud was born that would last for more than 25 years of episodes, span every corner of the town and several cities, and at least one era of history, involve the deaths of probably dozens of innocent bystanders, and never, in any meaningful sense, be resolved. The giant chicken's name, we eventually learn, is Ernie. His wife is Nicole. He has children. At one point during the long, strange history of their conflict, Peter and Ernie actually sit down to dinner together, and over the course of that meal, surrounded by their respective families, the two of them begin to make peace. The original cause of their conflict comes up. They both reflect on how strange it is that so much destruction has followed from something as inconsequential as a coupon expiration date. They laugh. They genuinely seem to arrive at understanding. And then the bill comes. And because both of them insist on paying it and neither of them will back down, the fighting starts again. That dinner is perhaps the most honest thing the show ever did with Ernie the Giant Chicken. It was not commentary, exactly. It was just an accurate portrait of a certain kind of human stubbornness, the kind where a conflict outlasts its original cause by years, where the two parties involved have long since forgotten what they were fighting about, where the habit of conflict has become more real than whatever started it. Peter and Ernie do not fight because of the coupon anymore. They fight because they have always fought, because fighting is the only language they share, because somewhere along the way the feud became part of their identities. The first chicken fight appeared in the second episode of the second season, titled Da Boom, which aired on the 26th of December 1999. In a flashback that explains the history between them, we see Peter receive the expired coupon and react to it with immediate and disproportionate violence. A fight breaks out. It takes them across several locations. It causes significant property damage. And when it finally ends, with Peter appearing to have come out on top, we see Ernie lying seemingly defeated, and then his eye opens. That eye opening is a signature moment in the history of the show. It happens at the end of nearly every chicken fight, this small indication that Ernie is not dead, that he is simply regrouping, that the feud has not ended and will not end. It is the show's way of telling you that some things in this fictional world simply do not resolve. Some things persist, some things come back. The second major chicken fight arrived in Season 4's episode, Blind Ambition. By this point, the format of the gag was already becoming clear. Ernie would appear without warning in the middle of an unrelated scene. Peter would see him. Something would pass between them, some animal recognition, some wordless acknowledgement of an ongoing debt. And then the fighting would begin. and it would not stop until the episode was nearly over, and several locations had been demolished, and Peter was staggering home while Ernie lay somewhere behind him, apparently dead, his eye eventually opening to let you know that the cycle would continue. The second fight took place at a train station, moved to a cruise ship, and ended at an airport. The locations are not random exactly, but they are not logical either. They are simply wherever the animators decided to put the characters next, and this becomes one of the defining qualities of the chicken fights as they accumulate over the years, the escalation. Each fight has to somehow be bigger, stranger, more destructive than the one before it. The geography of each battle grows more ambitious. The fight from Season 8 is widely considered the most spectacular, running for 6.5 minutes and incorporating a time machine, a trip into outer space, and a cloning device. 6.5 minutes. For reference, that is roughly a quarter of the total runtime of a typical episode. The show devoted a quarter of an episode to two characters hitting each other because of a coupon from the mid-1990s. There is something almost meditative about rewatching the chicken fights if you remove yourself from the expectation that they need to make sense. They have their own rhythm. A specific music cues up when Ernie appears. Peter's body language shifts in a specific way, a kind of resigned readiness, as if some part of him always knew this was coming. The fights move with a physical logic that is almost balletic, even when the actions involved are deeply irrational. Characters get thrown through windows in ways that reference specific action movies. The environments they pass through are rendered with real care by the animation department. These are not lazy sequences. They are technically accomplished set pieces that also happen to involve a man and a chicken fighting because of an expired promotional offer. The show is aware of its own ridiculousness here. In one memorable moment, Ernie and Peter find themselves mid-fight on Stewie's time pad and are accidentally transported into the events of the Back to the Future films. They fight through 1885 while Marty McFly's adventure is happening nearby. The show does not comment on this. It does not explain it. It simply happens and then they are somewhere else. The matter-of-fact quality of the impossibility is part of what makes it funny and part of what makes it feel dreamlike. The relationship between Peter and Ernie evolved in small ways across all these years. We learned Ernie's name. We met his wife, Nicole. We saw him have a brief and unlikely friendship with Lois, who Ernie apparently has no quarrel with, leading to a strange suburban situation where Nicole and Lois are in the same social circle, while their husbands continue a decades-long campaign of mutual destruction. At one point, Nicole and Lois even got into their own fight, which the show staged very differently from the Peter-Ernie battles. Their conflict involved slapping each other, not the sprawling, choreographed warfare of the men. The show is commenting on something there, though it is not entirely sure what. What is clear is that the chicken fight pattern serves a function in the show beyond the obvious comedy of the fights themselves. It is a kind of formal promise. Once you know the pattern exists, every appearance of Ernie carries a specific anticipatory quality. There is a moment of recognition, like hearing the first few notes of a song you have been waiting for. You know what is coming, and then it comes. The predictability is not a weakness of the bit. It is the point of the bit. The joke is partly that you knew this would happen, and it happened anyway, and nothing will ever change. Ernie was officially killed off in a later episode, with a producer confirming the decision in an interview. The character, after more than 25 years, had simply run his course, and the animators had done everything they could think to do with the format. The chicken fights had been running long enough that topping them had become genuinely difficult, and so the final encounter ended not with the expected eye-open confirmation of survival, but with a genuine ending. No eye, no fist moving into position, just silence. A lot of viewers felt something about that they did not entirely expect to feel. Because the chicken fights, for all their absurdity, had become a kind of reliable rhythm in a show that was often inconsistent. They were one of the things you could count on. They came back. They always came back. And the absence of that return feels like a small, specific loss. There is a metaphor somewhere in the chicken fights about human conflict, and the way grudges outlive their original causes, and the strange comfort of an enemy whose behavior is completely predictable. But the show never insists on the metaphor. It just keeps showing you the fight and letting you make of it what you will. Section 3. The Mystery of Stewie's Voice. One of the most genuinely strange and unresolved questions in Family Guy is also one of the most fundamental. It is a question that touches the very logic of the show's world. It is the kind of question that, once you start thinking about it, changes the way you watch every single scene that Stewie Griffin is in. Can anyone hear him? Stewie Griffin is a 1-year-old infant. He speaks in an elaborate, precisely enunciated, vaguely transatlantic accent that is more commonly associated with mid-century British theatrical villains than with any real baby who has ever existed. He uses words like dastardly and inconsequential and imbecilic in casual conversation. He references Noam Chomsky. He delivers monologues of considerable length and sophistication. And he does all of this from inside a crib, wearing a yellow shirt and a diaper, with a football-shaped head that his family has apparently never found unusual. The question of who can understand him is one that Seth MacFarlane himself has given contradictory answers to over the years. In one interview, he said that everyone in the family can hear and understand Stewie perfectly, but that they simply do not take him seriously because he is a baby, and adults tend to dismiss the things babies say regardless of how lucid those things are. In a separate panel at San Diego Comic-Con, he gave a slightly different answer, that Brian always understands him, Chris understands him sometimes, and Peter, Lois, and Meg essentially do not understand him most of the time. And then in both interviews, he added the caveat that the writers would break these rules whenever the story required it. That caveat tells you everything about how Family Guy actually works. The rules are real until they get in the way of something funnier, and then the rules are flexible until something else is needed and they become real again. It is a show that operates on comedic logic rather than narrative logic, and the Stewie question is one of the clearest places where you can see this operating in real time. What makes this interesting is how the inconsistency creates its own kind of texture across the series. Watch a scene where Stewie is delivering an elaborate speech about his plans, and you will find yourself automatically assessing whether anyone in the room is responding to him. If Lois is there and she does not react to what he says, does that mean she cannot hear him, or that she simply ignored him? If Peter gives a vague acknowledgement, is that because he understood and is choosing not to engage, or because the writers decided in this particular episode that Peter should hear the baby? The ambiguity becomes its own running layer of the show, a question you find yourself trying to answer even when you know there is no definitive answer. There is a fan theory, one of the more thoughtful ones that has circulated around the show over the years, that suggests the entire series is being told from Stewie's perspective. According to this reading, the world of Family Guy is the world as experienced and filtered through the consciousness of a 1-year-old with a remarkably sophisticated inner life. The people around him who ignore his elaborate speeches are not ignoring him because they cannot hear him. They are ignoring him because, from his actual infant perspective, the adults around him are enormous and baffling, and fundamentally not very responsive to what he needs from them. Lois, in this reading, becomes a villain not because she is objectively a bad mother, but because this is how an infant would naturally experience the frustrations of dependency. As Malice, Peter becomes a dangerous fool, not because he objectively is one, but because toddlers experience their father's carelessness as something threatening and enormous. This theory is not something the show has confirmed or denied. It probably falls into the category of things the writers would acknowledge as a coherent reading, while also noting that they were mainly just trying to set up whatever the joke was. But it has a genuinely interesting effect on how you watch the show if you carry it with you. Scenes that seem like they should be impossible, Stewie interacting with adults as an equal, become comprehensible as the filtered reality of a very smart child projecting his own reasoning onto people he cannot yet fully understand. The show eventually tried to address the question of Stewie's voice in an episode called Stewie's First Word, which aired as the season 19 premiere. In this episode, Stewie utters a profanity loudly enough and with enough emotional force that everyone around him suddenly seems to hear him clearly for the first time. The show's in-universe explanation for this is that Stewie can only break through to people when he is feeling an unusually intense emotion. Under ordinary circumstances, his words wash over the people around him without registering as language. But when the emotional pitch is high enough, something happens and the communication lands. Brian says to him, "I don't get it, Stewie. You've been talking forever. Why did everyone suddenly understand you now?" And Stewie gives his best theory. The intensity of the moment somehow allowed the word to burst through. This is a genuinely satisfying explanation in some ways. It accounts for the inconsistency by making the inconsistency part of the rule. Stewie can be understood, but only under specific and emotionally charged circumstances. It explains why Brian, who spends more time with Stewie in more intimate settings than anyone else, is the one who understands him most reliably. They have built a relationship in which Stewie's communication registers at an emotional level that is not available to people who are simply passing through the baby's day. But the explanation also raises new questions. If Stewie can be heard when the emotion is strong enough, then what about all those years of schemes and threats and elaborate villain speeches? Were those not emotionally intense? Were the attempts to murder Lois not carried out with sufficient feeling? The show does not try to resolve this. It offers the explanation and then returns to the comfortable ambiguity of the previous episodes, where Stewie speaks and people may or may not hear him depending on what the scene requires. What you are left with is a character who exists in a genuinely strange communicative space. He is the most eloquent person in every room he enters, and also the least understood. He has conversations of real depth and intimacy with Brian. He delivers monologues of considerable power to empty rooms. He plots and plans and schemes, and the world around him moves forward on its own momentum, occasionally intersecting with his plans and occasionally not, as if Stewie and the rest of the town are operating in parallel realities that sometimes overlap and sometimes do not. There is something unexpectedly poignant about this when you sit with it. A character who has enormous things to say and who is only sometimes heard. A voice that is always speaking and only intermittently received. The comedy of the situation is obvious. But underneath the comedy, if you let yourself feel it, there is something that touches on a very common human experience. The feeling of saying something important and not knowing if it landed. Brian understands him. That much is consistent. And the friendship that grows out of that understanding becomes one of the central relationships of the entire show. Brian is the one who hears Stewie. He is the one who responds. He is the one who takes seriously, at least sometimes, what Stewie is saying. And for a character who otherwise speaks into a room that may or may not be listening, having one reliable listener is everything. Section 4. The cosmology of Stewie Griffin. Here is something that the show tells you plainly, in the 9th season's 16th episode, if you are paying attention. Stewie Griffin created the universe, not metaphorically, not as a joke that the show immediately undercuts. Stewie Griffin, the 1-year-old baby in the yellow shirt with the football-shaped head and the dream of ruling the world, is the entity responsible for the Big Bang, the original explosion that set the universe in motion, the event from which all matter and energy and time and space derived. The 14 billion years of cosmic history that preceded the formation of Earth and everything on it, including Rhode Island and the town and Spooner Street and the Griffin House. All of it began because of something that happened to Stewie. The episode is called The Big Bang Theory, and the chain of events that leads to this revelation is worth following carefully, because it is one of the more genuinely inventive pieces of internal logic the show ever produced. It starts with Stewie and Brian having a petty argument. Stewie wants to go back in time to improve a comeback he made during a verbal sparring match. This is exactly the kind of small, absurd reason Stewie would use the time machine for, and the show lets the setup be as trivial as it sounds. The two of them end up fighting over control of the time machine and are accidentally ejected outside the space-time continuum entirely. This is a place where the laws of physics do not apply, and where Stewie's return pad, the device that would normally bring them home, cannot function. While they are stranded outside of time, Stewie figures out a solution. He can overload his return pad, triggering an explosion that will propel them back into the space-time continuum. It is a desperate and risky plan. He executes it. The explosion happens. They return to the present. Later, Stewie is doing research and makes the discovery that stops the episode in its tracks. The background radiation that created the universe, the cosmic signature of the Big Bang itself, matches exactly the signature of his return pad. The explosion he caused to get home was the explosion that started everything. He was not witnessing the Big Bang from outside it. He was its cause. The universe did not create Stewie Griffin. Stewie Griffin created the universe, and the universe then spent 14 billion years working toward the conditions that would produce Stewie Griffin, who would then go back and create it. This is a temporal predestination paradox, and it is airtight within the show's own rules. There is no point in the causal chain where you can insert a beginning, because the chain forms a loop. Stewie exists because the universe exists. The universe exists because Stewie created it. Neither came first. Both are necessary for the other. The show presents this as a reasonably matter-of-fact discovery. Stewie processes it, Brian reacts with appropriate astonishment, and then the episode moves on to its next crisis. The episode's next crisis involves Bertram. Bertram is Stewie's half-brother, conceived from the same sperm donor, and he is one of the recurring characters who represents a darker version of Stewie's own nature, more ruthless, less complicated by sentiment, fully committed to destruction without any of the ambivalence that Stewie increasingly shows. When Bertram learns that Stewie has a functioning time machine, he conceives a plan: travel back to the 1400s and kill Leonardo da Vinci, whom Stewie has just discovered is his ancestor on Lois's side of the family. If Leonardo da Vinci never exists, Stewie never exists. If Stewie never exists, the Big Bang never happens. If the Big Bang never happens, the universe is erased. This is a plot about a baby trying to end all of existence, and the show plays it with genuine dramatic weight, while also keeping its fundamental absurdity in view. Stewie and Brian travel back to 15th century Venice. They arrive 15 minutes before Bertram does, which gives Stewie time to encounter Leonardo and recognize the family resemblance. When Bertram arrives and throws a knife at the painter, Stewie intercepts it. He then ensures that Leonardo's bloodline continues by a method the show handles with characteristic indirectness, and the universe is preserved. What is remarkable about this episode is how seriously it takes its own premise. The rules of time travel established here are internally consistent. The stakes are genuinely cosmic, and the resolution requires Stewie to act not as a villain or a schemer, but as a protector, not of his own plans or his own ego, but of existence itself. There is something almost epic in the image of a 1-year-old baby saving the universe in 14th century Italy while wearing a diaper. The time machine itself is one of the show's most carefully developed recurring elements. Its first version appeared in the second season, when Stewie built a prototype for a trivial purpose: to go back in time so he would never have to start teething. The plans leaked to the neighborhood. A series of complications resulted, and Stewie had to go back and undo most of the events of that episode to restore the status quo. Peter tripped over the machine and destroyed it in the process. Stewie began teething anyway. The more familiar version of the time machine developed over subsequent seasons into a fully realized device with its own complex rules. It requires a return pad to work properly. It can be broken in ways that have devastating consequences, as Brian discovered when he used it without permission and accidentally reversed the entire flow of time for a period. It can be destroyed, as Stewie destroyed it in the 12th season's Life of Brian episode, a decision he immediately and deeply regretted. It can be rebuilt, as Stewie did in a later episode, though the new version had a somewhat different appearance and slightly different capabilities. The time machine functions in the show as a story engine of almost infinite possibility. It can reach any point in history. It can visit alternate timelines. It has been used to visit the pilot episode of Family Guy itself, where Brian and Stewie walk around in an episode that aired in 1999 while commenting on the animation style and the differences between that version of the show and the one they are currently living in. It is an extremely self-aware use of the device, and it works, because the show has spent enough seasons establishing the time machine's reality that returning to the pilot in it feels like a real journey rather than just a narrative trick. The Back to the Pilot episode deserves specific attention because of what it does with the time machine. Brian convinces Stewie to take him back to the first episode so he can warn his past self about the 11th of September 2001. This is an unusual request, and the episode does not treat it entirely lightly. Past Brian receives the warning. And then the episode explores what happens when you actually change something that significant in the past. The alterations cascade. The timeline becomes unrecognizable. Things that were supposed to happen do not happen. Things that were not supposed to happen fill the space left behind. The episode uses its time travel premise to make a point that the show states explicitly through Stewie, that you should not tamper with the past, even with the best intentions, because the consequences ripple outward in ways you cannot predict. This is the moral of the episode, and it is also, quietly, a reflection of something real in the show's history. Family Guy was canceled. It came back. Things were different after the return. Some things that existed in the early seasons were gone. Some things that did not exist before the return emerged in the space the cancellation left. The show changed, and the changes could not be undone, and some of them were improvements, and some of them were not, and the whole experience became part of what the show was. Stewie's relationship with the time machine is finally the most interesting window into his character over the long arc of the series. He built it to solve small problems and discovered it gave him access to everything. He used it for selfish purposes and stumbled into cosmic responsibility. He destroyed it and found that without it, he was helpless in a moment that mattered. And he rebuilt it, because he is Stewie Griffin, and rebuilding impossible things is what he does. Section 5. The Road to Episodes and what they were really about. There is a special category of Family Guy episode that fans treat differently from all the others. They are called the Road to episodes. The name comes from the Bob Hope and Bing Crosby films of the 1940s, a series of comedic road movies in which the two performers would travel to an exotic location and encounter adventures while bickering and competing for the affections of a woman. The Family Guy versions kept the structure but swapped the content entirely. Brian and Stewie traveling together, usually by accident or at Stewie's instigation, to places and times that no one would voluntarily choose to visit. The woman is absent. The bickering remains. The first of these episodes was Road to Rhode Island from the second season. Brian has to pick Stewie up from his grandparents' house in Palm Springs and bring him home, and the journey becomes increasingly complicated. Cars are wrecked, trains are missed. Brian has a painful encounter with the facility where he was born. Stewie and Brian sing a duet about getting themselves home. It is a small episode by the standards of what the format would later become, but it established something that the show would return to repeatedly over the following seasons. That Brian and Stewie are better together than they are apart, and that the specific dynamic between them, the intellectual equal footing, the genuine affection that neither of them fully acknowledges, the way each brings something the other lacks, is one of the most interesting things the show has to offer. The Road to episodes that followed covered more ambitious territory. Road to Europe sent them to England and Germany and eventually to Salzburg, following Brian's attempt to accompany Stewie on a trip that was meant to be Stewie's journey to the studio of his favorite children's television show. Road to Rupert sent them to Colorado after Chris sold Stewie's beloved stuffed bear at a yard sale, and Stewie was determined to get it back. Road to Germany may be the most ambitious of the early installments. Mort Goldman accidentally stepped into Stewie's time machine, thinking it was a bathroom, and landed in Poland on September 1, 1939, the day World War II began. Stewie and Brian had to go in after him and get him out of Nazi-occupied Europe, which they eventually accomplished by stealing a German Enigma machine and flying a Lancaster bomber across the Atlantic to Canada. The sheer audacity of that episode's premise, the things it asks you to accept as normal within its own frame, is part of what makes the Road to format special. These episodes operate by a different set of rules than ordinary Family Guy. The cutaway gags are largely absent. The plots have real beginnings, middles, and endings. The characters are allowed to be more fully themselves than they are in the episodes built primarily around Peter's misadventures. And the relationship between Brian and Stewie is always the real subject, regardless of what the external adventure is. Road to the Multiverse, which premiered as the 8th season opener in September 2009, is widely considered the creative peak of the format. The episode follows Brian and Stewie as they use an interdimensional remote control to visit parallel universes, each one animated in a different style, each one functioning as its own complete visual world. They visit a universe where Christianity never emerged, which allowed science to advance more rapidly, so that the technology and medicine of that world are significantly ahead of the one they came from. They visit a Disney universe, rendered in a style that feels genuinely faithful to the animation of Disney's golden age, where the Griffin family appears as versions of beloved Disney characters, and where Mort Goldman's arrival as a Jewish character causes an extremely dark turn in the otherwise cheerful musical number. They visit a Flintstones universe, a universe where the Japanese Empire won the Second World War and now controls North America. A Robot Chicken universe that the show can briefly render as stop-motion animation, a universe where they are both in live action, played by actors. The live-action universe is a very small moment in the episode, and it passes quickly, but its impact is disproportionate to its length. For approximately 30 seconds, Brian and Stewie exist as physical creatures in the real world, played by real performers, walking around a real set. It is funny. It is also strange in a way that briefly gets under your skin. The show has spent years establishing what these characters look like and how they move, and seeing that translation into live action creates a specific kind of cognitive dissonance that takes a moment to process. You are looking at what the characters would be if they were real, and the answer is both more ordinary and more uncanny than you expected. The universe they spend the most time in, and the one that gives the episode its dramatic weight, is a universe where dogs are the dominant species and humans serve as their pets. Brian is immediately at home here. He is respected. He has status. He is, in this world, the kind of creature he has always felt himself to be, rather than the kind of creature everyone at home treats him as. Stewie, conversely, is in the position that actual babies occupy in the real world: small, dependent, spoken to in condescending tones, and not taken seriously. The reversal illuminates something about their dynamic that the show has never stated directly. Brian's comfort in the dog-dominant world and Stewie's discomfort there are not just the immediate comedy of the situation. They are a capsule version of how these two characters experience ordinary life. Brian always slightly diminished by his status as a pet, Stewie always slightly frustrated by his status as a baby. When the episode ends and they return home, a human Brian from the dog-dominant universe follows them through the portal at the last moment. He has glimpsed a world where humans are respected and intelligent and free, and he cannot bear to go back. He arrives in the town, full of hope. He is immediately hit by a car. The joke is funny, but it is also a statement about the show's relationship with hope and escape and the things we imagine will be different in better versions of our lives. Human Brian made it through. He found the better world, and it killed him in about 10 seconds. The universe of Family Guy is the universe of Family Guy. There is no exit. Road to the North Pole took the format in a more sentimental direction, following Brian and Stewie on a Christmas journey that started as a mission and became something genuinely affecting. Road to India sent them to an arranged marriage situation. Road to Vegas duplicated them, creating two Brians and two Stewies and exploring the comedic and occasionally uncomfortable implications. Each installment found new things to do within the frame while keeping the core relationship at its center. What the Road to episodes demonstrate collectively is something important about what Family Guy is capable of when it commits to storytelling over spectacle. Every installment moves through a complete narrative. Every installment allows its two main characters to have real conversations, to disagree in ways that matter, to express care for each other that the regular episode format rarely makes space for. The best of them are genuinely moving in moments that sneak up on you, small beats of real feeling tucked inside the absurdity of the adventure. Brian and Stewie are a strange pairing. A talking dog with literary pretensions and a genius infant with megalomaniacal tendencies. Their friendship should not make sense. It makes complete sense. And the Road to episodes are where that friendship is most visible and most real. Section 6. Easter eggs, hidden messages, and the rewards for paying attention. The writers of Family Guy have a long habit of hiding things. Not hiding things in a way that is essential to understanding the show. You do not need to pause on every background detail to follow what is happening, but hiding things in a way that rewards the kind of viewer who watches closely, who reads the signs in the background, who notices when the alphabet blocks in Stewie's playroom spell something they were not supposed to spell. In the Season 2 episode, Love Thy Trophy, Stewie is playing with his blocks at the opening of a scene. The blocks are colored and the scene passes quickly. If you pause it, if you look closely enough at what the blocks say, you will see that Stewie has arranged them to spell red rum. This is, of course, murder spelled backwards, the phrase from Stanley Kubrick's 1980 adaptation of Stephen King's novel The Shining, written on walls by a child with psychic abilities who is slowly becoming aware of a supernatural evil. The joke works on multiple levels. It is a reference to a beloved horror film. It fits perfectly with who Stewie is, a baby with murderous intentions arranged around a very specific target. And the choice of that particular film reference, in which a child is the vehicle for something dark and uncontrollable, while the adults around him fail to notice, echoes the basic premise of Stewie's entire character. The newspaper headline gag is another beloved tradition in the show's hidden detail catalog. In the episode Model Misbehavior, the Griffin family wins a boat race, and their story makes the front page of the newspaper. When Lois holds up the paper to show the family, the headline about their win is visible at the top. If you pause the scene and look at the smaller headline near the bottom of the page, you will find this text. DVDs paused for headline joke, millions disappointed. The show is both rewarding you for pausing to find the hidden joke and simultaneously telling you that you are going to be disappointed by doing so. It is a self-referential joke about the act of looking for self-referential jokes, and the fact that the text acknowledges the disappointment in advance makes the joke funnier rather than less satisfying. The DVD cover Easter egg is more obscure and requires you to be watching a very specific version of the episode. In a yard sale sequence from the show, Brian's table has a DVD on it that is clearly the cover of Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story. In the extended DVD version of this scene, which is not in the broadcast cut, there is additional dialogue that breaks down the fourth wall in a way that the regular version does not. The show was aware that its dedicated fans were the ones most likely to buy the DVD and therefore most likely to encounter the extended scene, and the extended scene acknowledges that fact. The Gumball to Gumball reference is a different kind of Easter egg, one that is hidden not in a background detail but in the show's ongoing internal mythology. In the episode, If I'm Dying, I'm Lying, Peter is given the power to bring back any canceled television show he chooses, and he selects a show called Gumball to Gumball. The name is presented as a throwaway joke about Peter's terrible taste. What the show does not explain is that Gumball to Gumball was the actual name of the very first project that Seth MacFarlane pitched to Fox before Family Guy existed. He pitched it. They passed on it. Years later, he became one of the most successful creators on their network, and quietly slipped the name of his rejected pilot into the background of his hit show. It is a joke that only makes full sense if you know the biography of the man who made it. The license plate on Jesus' car, in the episode where Peter stumbles upon Mel Gibson's personal suite and finds a trailer for a Passion of the Christ sequel, reads WID. This is a play on the phrase, "What would Jesus do?" familiar from the WWJD bracelets popular in Christian communities during the 1990s. But the license plate version, "What would I do?" changes the perspective. Jesus is not asking what Jesus would do. Jesus already knows what he is going to do. He is asking what he personally would do as himself, which undercuts the devotional quality of the original phrase in a single small substitution. The joke is easy to miss at normal speed, and the license plate is only on screen for a moment. The in-universe staff references deserve their own category. The writers of Family Guy have a long tradition of inserting their own names, likenesses, and professional frustrations into the background of the show. A character who appears only briefly and has no given official name has been identified by show staff as Holden Caulfield, named after the famous protagonist of J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye. This character's sole function is to follow Peter around and call him a phony. The connection to Holden Caulfield, Salinger's protagonist who uses phony as his primary insult for everyone he encounters, is obvious enough that it clearly was the writer's intention, even if it was never stated in the episode itself. The joke only lands if you have read the novel, which means it is both self-contained and enriched by external knowledge at the same time. The audio staff Easter eggs are less visible but equally deliberate. Ron Jones and Walter Murphy are both composers who worked on Family Guy. In the episode Brian Does Hollywood, which follows Brian's career detour into adult film direction, there is a scene at an adult film awards ceremony where the nominees for Best Original Score are read aloud. The nominees include Ron Jones and Walter Murphy, who in the real world composed the actual music for the show. The third nominee, there for comedic contrast, is John Williams, the composer of the Star Wars films and Jurassic Park and Harry Potter and dozens of other iconic film scores. The joke is that the man responsible for some of the most celebrated music in cinema history is competing against the in-house composers of a Fox animated comedy for an adult film industry award. It is a joke for people who know who all three of those people are, and it is completely invisible to anyone who does not. The 99 red balloons moment is brief enough to qualify as genuinely easy to miss. In a scene from a Season 5 episode, characters are releasing red balloons and counting them. The count stops at 99. The reference to Nina's 1983 pop song 99 Luftballons is clear if you know the song and its English counterpart 99 Red Balloons. But the show does not draw attention to it. It simply does the math correctly and lets the reference sit there for the viewers who will catch it. The Adam West tribute deserves special mention because of its emotional weight. The real Adam West, who voiced the mayor of the town in the show for many years, passed away in 2017. In a Halloween episode that aired before his death, two children come to the door of Mayor Adam West's house dressed in costumes. One of them is wearing a Batman costume, which is the obvious reference to West's most famous role as the Dark Knight in the 1960s television series. The second child is dressed as Catman, a character West voiced in the animated series The Fairly Odd Parents. The show included that second, less obvious costume as a way of honoring the full range of West's career, not just his most famous work, but also his contribution to a children's animated series that many of Family Guy's writers likely grew up watching. It is a small, warm detail in an episode that could not have known it would eventually be watched as a kind of memorial. The Luke Perry TV Guide cover has a message beneath the celebrity's photo that reads, "If you can read this, Family Guy is on the air." The message is literally too small to read at normal viewing speed. You would need to pause the show to find it, and pausing the show to read background text in a magazine a character is holding is an unusual level of commitment. The message rewards that commitment with the mildest possible joke, confirmation that the show exists, which you already knew because you are watching it. The joke is the tautology. It is funny because it tells you nothing while pretending to tell you something, and it is hidden at a scale that most viewers will never see, which makes the people who find it feel like they have discovered something while also telling them that what they have discovered is nothing. There is a specific attitude in all of this toward the audience. The show has a sense of its audience as people who are paying close attention, who will notice things, who will pause the DVD or scrub back through streaming to look at something twice. And it simultaneously has a sense of its audience as people who deserve to be teased for that attentiveness. The reward for looking closely is often a joke about the act of looking closely. The Easter egg says you are watching carefully, and you will be slightly disappointed. And somehow that does not prevent people from looking for the next one. Section 7. The architecture of running gags. A running gag is a strange thing to build and maintain over 25 years. The challenge is that the premise which made the gag funny the first time is not necessarily what makes it funny the second or third or 15th time. Sometimes a repeated joke becomes funnier through accumulation, through the comfort of recognizing a pattern and feeling the pleasure of that pattern being fulfilled. Sometimes a repeated joke loses whatever made it surprising and becomes purely formal, a gesture that the show makes because it has always made it rather than because it is still landing. And sometimes, in the rarest cases, a repeated joke transcends its own origins and becomes something genuinely larger, a symbol of the show's character, a shorthand for what kind of thing this is and what relationship you have with it. Family Guy has examples of all three categories. Conway Twitty falls somewhere between the second and third. Conway Twitty was a real American country music artist, born Harold Lloyd Jenkins in 1933, who died in 1993 and held the record for the most #1 singles on the Billboard country charts for years. He was a genuinely significant figure in country music, recording dozens of hits across several decades. He also serves as one of Family Guy's most notorious running gags, used when a character needs a distraction or when the writers want to fill time in a way that is openly, self-consciously, even defiantly uninteresting. The structure of the Conway Twitty gag is always roughly the same. A character is in some kind of trouble. They need to create a distraction. They or another character says, "Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Conway Twitty," and then an extended clip of Conway Twitty performing one of his songs, often in full, plays while the fictional audience and the viewer at home sit through it. The gag almost never includes a punchline. The song ends, the scene resumes. Whatever problem needed a distraction may or may not have been addressed by the interruption. The first time this happened, the unexpected absurdity of it carried comedic weight on its own. The second time, you recognized the pattern and the recognition had its own mild pleasure. By the third and fourth times, the show was clearly daring the viewer to find it funny again, knowing that many viewers had given up and that the people who stayed found something in the sheer commitment to the bit. God himself eventually told Peter to ask Conway Twitty to stop, which the show treated as evidence that the bit had reached cosmic proportions. In a later episode's fantasy sequence set in the future, Peter encounters Conway Twitty in whatever afterlife the show imagines, and Twitty is apparently fine with the gags, expressing no hard feelings. Conway Twitty is interesting because the show is completely transparent about what it is doing. It is filling time. It is not pretending otherwise. And there is a small audience for that specific variety of comedy. The comedy of deliberate anti-comedy, the joke that consists entirely of the show declining to make a joke, and then sitting with the silence while you wait for the joke that never comes. Some viewers found it delightful every time. Most found it tolerable occasionally and irritating repeatedly. The show knew this and did it anyway, which is either evidence of creative stubbornness or creative indifference depending on how charitable you are feeling. Peter's knee injury is a different kind of running gag. Its origin is very specific. In the Season 2 episode, Wasted Talent, Peter wins a tour of the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery and, in his excitement, runs home as fast as he can in a clear parody of the scene from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where Charlie Bucket runs home after finding the golden ticket. Peter trips and hurts his knee. He sits on the ground, grabs his knee, and emits a sustained series of pained inhales and whines that go on considerably longer than the injury itself seems to warrant. Seth MacFarlane has acknowledged in DVD commentary that he enjoys letting gags run slightly past where they should, and this knee injury sequence is the most cited example of that philosophy. The injury itself is not inherently funny. What makes it funny is the length. The whining continues past the point where it should stop and keeps going, and you keep waiting for it to end, and it does not end. And somewhere in that gap between expectation and reality, the comedy lives. It is anticlimax extended to the point of absurdity. It is a joke about the way minor physical pain can feel enormously disproportionate. It is a gag that works primarily because it goes on too long, and the length is the point. The gag has been reprised many times across many seasons, with variations. Other characters have their versions of it. The AT-AT Walker from the Star Wars parody episodes has its own version when it trips. Lois has a version that targets a different body part. The consistency of the underlying structure, the shock, the grab, the elongated vocalization, the weight, remains across all these variations. It is one of the show's most imitated gags precisely because the structure is so transferable. Cleveland's bathtub gag has a specific origin and a specific escalation. The first time a bathtub came crashing through Cleveland's floor and landed in the yard was an act of Peter-caused destruction. The image of Cleveland sliding down in a bathtub while the floor collapses around him, delivered in his characteristic mild, measured tone, became one of the most beloved visual gags in the show's history. The gag was subsequently reprised with different causes. A giraffe destroying the house, the Griffin house flying out of control and crashing through it, Peter deliberately doing something to cause another collapse. Each repetition found a new pretext for the same outcome. The bath, the fall, Cleveland, wet and philosophical about what has just happened to his home. The evil monkey who lived in Chris's closet is one of the most unexpected characters in the show's early run to have accumulated his own substantial mythology. He appeared first in the 3rd season, in the episode Damn It, Janet, with a single defining characteristic. When confronted, he would point at Chris with a trembling, accusatory finger and bare his teeth in an expression of threatening menace. He had no backstory, no explanation. He was simply the evil monkey in the closet, and the implication that this was something Chris had simply learned to live with was the entire joke. The evil monkey appeared sporadically over subsequent seasons, always with the same gesture, always occupying the same basic role. An unexplained menace that existed just outside the comfortable family world of the Griffins. And then, in the later episode Hannah Banana, the show gave him a backstory. He had once had a normal life, a wife who left him, a series of setbacks. The pointing gesture, which had always seemed like pure malice, turned out to be rooted in a particular moment of personal devastation. He was not evil, he was broken. This is the episode that many fans of The Evil Monkey point to as the moment the gag effectively ended. Not because the episode was bad, but because a character whose comedy comes entirely from mystery is fundamentally changed by explanation. Once you know why the monkey points at Chris with that expression, you cannot unknow it. The menace becomes sadness. the absurdity becomes pathos. The joke is over. He eventually left the closet entirely and moved to live with Quagmire. Which is, if you think about it, a strange but somehow appropriate ending for a character whose entire existence was a kind of sustained joke about the weird, unexplained things that live in the margins of family life. The Kool-Aid Man is a different category of running gag, pure escalation of an existing cultural joke. The Kool-Aid Man, from the long-running advertising campaign for the drink, was known for bursting through walls and announcing his presence. Family Guy took this at face value and inserted the Kool-Aid Man into situations where his wall bursting was profoundly inappropriate. Court proceedings, funerals, therapy sessions. The humor comes from the collision between the Kool-Aid Man's irrepressible enthusiasm and the gravity of the situation he has just intruded upon. He does not understand that his arrival is unwelcome. He never understands. He just bursts through and says, "Oh yeah," and the people in the room have to process both their current crisis and the fact that a giant anthropomorphic beverage container has just entered the space. What all these gags share, beyond their individual character, is a relationship to the viewer's memory. They depend on you having seen them before. The first appearance is a joke. Every subsequent appearance is a reference to the first appearance, and an agreement between the show and the viewer that this particular thing is part of the shared language between them. Running gags are a form of intimacy. They say, "We have been doing this together for long enough that some of this does not need explaining. We just need to do the thing, and you will understand why." Section 8. The Characters Who Vanished. This fictional town has a memory problem. Characters enter the Griffin family's world, spend significant time there, build relationships that seem substantial, and then simply stop appearing. Not because they have died or moved away or done something that would logically cause the relationship to end, though occasionally those explanations are offered. More often, they simply cease to show up, and the show moves forward as if they were never quite as central as they seemed. This is not unique to Family Guy. Long-running shows lose track of supporting characters all the time. But the show is unusually willing to develop characters deeply and then let them drift away, which means the show's history contains a number of figures who feel, in retrospect, like they deserved more than they got. Jillian Russell, Brian's girlfriend for several seasons in the middle of the show's run, is one of the clearest examples. She was voiced by Drew Barrymore, which already signals a certain level of creative investment in the character. Jillian was cheerful, generous, and significantly less intellectually equipped than Brian, a dynamic that the show used both for comedy and for character revelation. Brian's treatment of Jillian, his condescension, his impatience with her limited understanding of the world, said more about Brian's flaws than about Jillian's. She was more genuinely good-natured than he gave her credit for, and his eventual departure from the relationship said less about her inadequacy than about his. She went on to marry Derek Wilcox. Derek Wilcox was subsequently killed off during the Season 9 ensemble murder mystery episode. Jillian continued to appear through Season 11 before gradually fading into the background. She attends Brian's funeral in the Season 12 episode where he is killed by a car, and then surfaces only rarely after that. Kevin Swanson, Joe and Bonnie's son, had a notably troubled continuity. He was introduced as a brooding teenager with a brief romantic involvement with Meg. He was then killed off, becoming a casualty of a war he had been serving in. And then he was resurrected in a Thanksgiving episode involving a conspiracy theory and a soldier who was supposed to have died but had not, and Kevin reappeared alive after 5 seasons of being officially dead. His character since then has been used primarily as a vehicle for jokes about post-traumatic stress, which is a tonally complicated direction that the show has handled with varying degrees of care. Meg's friend Beth represents one of the most complete disappearances in the show's history. She was a regular presence in early Meg storylines, a short blonde-haired girl who appeared at Meg's birthday party, her slumber party, various school events. She was friendly in the background way that supporting characters often are. She was in enough episodes to feel like a stable fixture of Meg's social world. And then she simply was not there anymore. No explanation, no farewell. No mention of where she had gone or what had happened to her. Beth ceased to exist in the show the way certain minor characters in real life cease to exist in your daily experience. Not through any specific departure, but through a gradual reduction in presence until you realize one day that you have not thought about them in years, and cannot pinpoint the last time you did. Meg has always had this problem in the show, where relationships that seem to be developing around her get quietly abandoned. This is partly a reflection of the show's broader treatment of Meg as a character, where investment in her storylines was inconsistent at best. The friends she developed were only as permanent as the episode that introduced them, unless the writers made a specific decision to return to them. And, more often than not, the decision was not made, and the friends simply ceased to appear. Diane Simmons, the original co-anchor of the town's Channel 5 News alongside Tom Tucker, represents the rare case of a character who was conclusively written out, rather than quietly abandoned. She had been a fixture of the show from very early on, a recognizable recurring presence who served a specific satirical function. The ambitious local news anchor in a toxic professional relationship with her co-anchor. She was killed in the Season 9 episode And Then There Were Fewer, a feature-length murder mystery in which several characters die, and Diane is ultimately revealed as the killer before being shot herself. Her death was permanent, and the show replaced her with Joyce Kinney, who had a specific backstory connecting her to Lois that was explored in subsequent episodes. What is interesting about Diane Simmons' departure is how complete it was. She did not fade. She did not drift to the background. She was definitively ended in a specific episode that was clearly designed to be a farewell to the character. This stands in contrast to the many other characters who simply stopped showing up, and the contrast suggests that when the writers did want to officially close out a character's story, they were capable of doing so with real craft. The decision was not always made, but when it was, the execution was there. Muriel Goldman, Mort's wife, died in the same episode. Her death was part of the story rather than the conclusion of a character arc, and it left Mort in a significantly different situation than he had occupied before. His relationship with Muriel had been a background fixture of the show, one of those couples who existed to populate the social world of the town and provide context for comedy rather than to drive storylines. Her death changed that, leaving him a widower whose situation was occasionally acknowledged in subsequent episodes and occasionally forgotten. James Woods is a case unto himself, a real person who appeared as a version of himself in multiple episodes, built a legitimate friendship with Peter across those appearances, was killed in And Then There Were Fewer, was subsequently resurrected in a later episode for no particularly explained reason, and has appeared occasionally since then. The relationship between the real James Woods and his Family Guy counterpart became complicated in later years, as the real person became associated with political positions that clashed with the show's general worldview, and his appearances became less frequent. Whether his eventual absence reflected a creative decision or simply a shift in the show's interest in him is not something the show has addressed directly. What emerges from looking at all these characters collectively is a portrait of the town as a place where people arrive with apparent permanence and then gradually recede. The town has a core that stays fixed, the Griffin family and their immediate neighbors, and a small group of recurring institutions. Around that core is a much larger population that cycles through, some staying longer than others, some departing with ceremony, and some simply drifting away while you were looking somewhere else. The show is, in this sense, a very accurate representation of how communities actually work. The people who feel essential are eventually gone. The people who seemed peripheral sometimes become central. The relationships that promise to develop often do not, while relationships that began as casual fixtures deepen into something real. The town, for all its unreality, captures something true about how the landscape of a life shifts and reshapes over time. Section 9. The Creator's Shadow. There is a story about how Family Guy almost ended before it reached where it is now. On the morning of the 11th of September 2001, Seth MacFarlane was supposed to be a passenger on American Airlines flight 1 out of Boston. He had a legitimate booking. He was supposed to be on that flight. The flight departed at 7:45 in the morning and was hijacked shortly after takeoff by 5 men with box cutters. It was the first plane to hit the World Trade Center. MacFarlane was not on it. He had stayed up too late the night before, celebrating with drinks after giving a speech at his alma mater. His travel agent had made a mistake with the itinerary, noting the departure time as 8:15 rather than 7:45. MacFarlane arrived at the gate approximately 10 minutes after the doors had closed. He stood there and watched the plane leave without him. He took a later flight home. When he landed, he saw on television what had happened to the plane he was supposed to have been on. MacFarlane has discussed this in interviews several times over the years. He describes it with notable calm and an absence of the dramatic self-narrative that many people in similar positions adopt. He does not use it as evidence of fate or divine intervention or purpose. He simply says that he had missed flights before, that coincidences happen, that a day earlier he might have been crossing a street 5 minutes earlier and been hit by a car without ever knowing the near miss had occurred. He declines to assign meaning to it. He survived because of a hangover and a typo. That is the story, and he does not dress it up. What is interesting from the perspective of the show is that Family Guy was still on its original run in September 2001. It had already been canceled once and was in its third season, months away from its second cancellation. The show's future was genuinely uncertain. Had MacFarlane died that morning, the question of whether anyone would have revived it for a fourth season in 2005 becomes genuinely unanswerable. The Adult Swim reruns that drove the show's revival were still 2 years in the future. The DVD sales that demonstrated the audience's loyalty had not yet happened. The evidence that brought Family Guy back did not yet exist. The show's entire post-cancellation existence, the revival, the expanded mythology, the road to episodes, the Stewie cosmology, the chicken fights, everything that has accumulated since 2005 has a ghost in it. The version of the timeline where a travel agent typed the correct departure time and Seth MacFarlane got on the plane. The show has addressed the 9/11 connection directly and obliquely over the years. In Back to the Pilot, the episode where Brian travels back to the first episode, Brian tells his past self about the attacks. He is trying to prevent something terrible. Stewie warns him against this, and the episode's moral comes through clearly. You cannot change the past, even when the change seems obviously right, because the consequences ripple outward unpredictably. The episode was MacFarlane's way of addressing something personal through the show's established vocabulary of time travel and consequences. Brian and Stewie have a brief exchange in an episode that references the situation directly. Brian tells Stewie that he was supposed to be on one of those planes. Stewie replies immediately, "Yeah, me too." The implication is that both of them exist as versions of their creator, that the show contains MacFarlane's own near-death as a kind of foundational fact about the world it inhabits. The Rhode Island School of Design connection runs through the show in quieter ways. The show is set in Rhode Island, which reflects where MacFarlane spent his formative adult years as a student. The working-class texture of the Griffin family's world reflects something about the social landscape of that region, the specific combination of Irish Catholic culture and New England geography, and the kind of neighborhood where people have lived in the same houses for generations. These are not autobiographical details in a direct sense. They are environmental. They are what it felt like to be in that place at that time, filtered through the specific lens of an animated comedy about a fictional family. The Gumball to Gumball reference, mentioned earlier in the Easter egg section, is worth returning to here because it sits at the intersection of personal history and creative revenge. MacFarlane pitched a project called Gumball to Fox before Family Guy existed. They passed on it. Years later, he put the show's name in an episode as a throwaway reference to terrible television. The joke only makes full sense if you know the biographical context, and most viewers do not. But the people who do know it feel a specific pleasure in recognizing it, the creator leaving a small, encoded record of the humiliation of rejection inside the success that followed it. The Dexter's Laboratory and Johnny Bravo connections are more technical. MacFarlane worked as an animator on those shows early in his career at Hanna-Barbera, before Family Guy existed. The experience shaped his understanding of animation production and gave him the professional foundation to build his own show. These are not Easter eggs exactly, more facts about the show's prehistory that occasionally surface in discussions of how it was made. What becomes clear when you look at the show through the lens of its creator's biography is how much of what feels like random choice is actually rooted in specific experience. The Rhode Island setting, the Irish Catholic family dynamic, the working-class sensibility alongside the aspirational intellectual posturing that Brian exemplifies, the political views that run through the show with varying degrees of subtlety, none of it is random. All of it comes from somewhere real, even when what it produces on screen is thoroughly surreal. The show's relationship with its own creator became more complicated as that creator stepped back from daily involvement. The gap between what McFarlane might have done and what the show actually did became harder to identify as his fingerprints on specific episodes faded. What remained was the world he had built: the house on Spooner Street, the six core characters, the town with its institutions and its recurring citizens, the vocabulary of cutaway gags and running patterns that the show had developed over its first several seasons. The world outlasted the level of his direct involvement with it, as worlds tend to do. There is something quietly poignant in the contrast between the McFarlane, who pitched a 15-minute pilot to Fox in 1998, bursting with something he needed to make, and the McFarlane of later years who described the show primarily in terms of what it enables him to fund elsewhere. Neither picture is complete without the other. The enthusiasm of the beginning and the pragmatism of the continuation are both parts of the same story, and the story is about what happens when something you made with passion becomes an institution that exists for reasons beyond your passion. The show is still running. The house on Spooner Street is still there. Whatever was in it has settled into the walls and the furniture and the specific gravity of that small fictional place. And all of it began with a young animator from Connecticut who got on a plane, and a different young animator from Connecticut who almost did not. Section 10, The Multiverse, and what it says about Family Guy's identity. The multiverse, as a concept, is a gift to a show like Family Guy. When you can travel between parallel universes, you can do anything you want in any single episode and reset completely. You can explore characters as different versions of themselves without committing to any of those versions. You can make the familiar strange and the strange familiar. You can acknowledge the show's own artificiality, its constructedness, by showing what the characters would look like if they had been made by different people with different aesthetics and different values. And you can do all of this while never actually changing anything in the main story, because the parallel universe is, by definition, not the one that counts. Road to the Multiverse uses this gift with more creativity and more genuine investment than almost any other episode in the show's history. The choice to animate each universe in a distinct visual style was technically demanding and aesthetically ambitious. The Disney universe required the animators to genuinely understand and replicate the conventions of Disney's golden age. The Flintstones universe required a specific visual language that had its own history and its own rules. The live-action universe required a completely different kind of production. For an animated show with a standard television budget and schedule, the commitment to making each universe feel genuinely different rather than just slightly modified is striking. The Christianity-free universe is the episode's thematic centerpiece, even if it is not its funniest segment. The premise is that a world without the Christian religion would have spent the centuries of the medieval period differently, without the institutional suppression of scientific inquiry that characterized parts of the Catholic Church's history. In this universe, science advanced more rapidly, and by the present day, the town is a cleaner, healthier, more technologically advanced place. Roads are faster, medicine is better, the city is generally less run down, and Meg, who is unremarkable in the regular universe, is beautiful in this one. The show notes through Stewie that even in this improved world, she is still considered one of the less attractive residents. The improvement was relative. The Disney universe is both the episode's most visually accomplished segment and its darkest. The Griffin family members are redesigned as versions of classic Disney characters. Lois resembles Snow White, Peter looks like one of the dwarfs, Joe becomes Mrs. Potts from Beauty and the Beast. They are all singing about pie and sunshine and the simple joys of existence in a way that captures the specific aesthetic of Disney's golden age extremely accurately. And then Mort Goldman wanders in. And the Disney characters, who have just been radiating warmth and positivity, immediately become hostile toward Mort. The specific quality being referenced here is the historical controversy around Walt Disney's alleged anti-Semitism, which the show treats with characteristic bluntness by making the Disney universe's ugliness explicit and immediate rather than leaving it as an implication. The Robot Chicken universe is a brief but affectionate moment. Robot Chicken was another animated comedy airing on Adult Swim during the same period, created by Seth Green, who also voices Chris Griffin on Family Guy. The Robot Chicken universe is rendered in the stop-motion style of that show, and Peter appears as an action figure of himself, and Stewie makes a joke about being on a major network for 30 seconds before the universe ends. It is a genuine crossover with a show that the Family Guy writers clearly had a friendly relationship with, even as the two shows operated in completely different comedic registers. The real-world universe is the one that gets least attention in most analyses, but deserves its own consideration. When Brian and Stewie arrive in a universe where they are in live action, they are played by actual humans. The costumes are recognizable versions of the animated characters. The actors playing them behave the way the animated characters would behave. And the scene around them is a real physical environment, a real room with real furniture, real light. The joke is that this is the real world, which is the universe where everything is slightly less interesting and slightly less flexible than the one they came from. In the real world, you cannot do what they can do in the animated world. In the real world, the rules are rigid and the palette is narrow and the possibilities are fewer. This is a small, possibly unintended observation about the nature of animation as a medium. Animation allows for a freedom that live action does not. The reason the multiverse episode can exist and can do what it does is because the show lives in a world where the laws of physics and the conventions of visual representation are suggestions rather than requirements. The live-action universe, the real world, is presented as one possibility among many, and not necessarily the most interesting one. The dog-dominant universe is where the episode's emotional core lives. Brian's comfort there, his ease. The way his status in that world reflects something that is permanently absent from his status in the regular one. Brian is always a pet in the town. He is always someone's dog, regardless of how sophisticated and educated he is, regardless of what he contributes intellectually and emotionally to the family, regardless of his genuine friendship with Stewie or his various relationships in the community. The show has never been entirely comfortable examining this directly. The dog-dominant universe allows it to make the observation laterally, through contrast, without the show having to explicitly state what it implies. Stewie's discomfort in the same universe reflects his own complicated status in the regular world. He is, technically, the most powerful being on Spooner Street. He built a time machine and an interdimensional teleporter and a number of weapons that could end lives or reroute history. He is, as the show eventually reveals, the being responsible for the creation of the universe. He is also 1 year old and is physically incapable of doing most things without assistance. His discomfort in a world where this dynamic is externalized, where he is small and dependent and spoken to in the condescending tones adults use with babies, is a rare moment of the show acknowledging what Stewie's existence is actually like from the inside. The human Brian who jumps through the portal at the last moment and is immediately killed by a car is the episode's final statement. There is a better world available. There is a version of things where the status quo is different. And the show will not let you live in it. You can visit. You can see what it looks like. You cannot stay. This is a comedy about a specific family in a specific town, and the town is not going to change in the ways that would actually address the discomforts that the multiverse episode has just identified. Brian returns home. Stewie goes back to his crib. The portal closes. Everything is as it was. The multiverse in Family Guy is not a tool for change. It is a tool for revelation. It shows you what already is by showing you what could be instead. And what it reveals is that the world of the town, with all its patterns and its recurring gags and its immortal giant chicken and its baby who created the universe, is genuinely strange and genuinely specific, and that the strangeness and specificity are what make it feel like a place worth returning to. Section 11. The pattern of resurrection. Death in the town is not what it appears to be. This should be the first thing you know about the world of Family Guy. Characters die. Characters come back. Sometimes the coming back is treated as a significant event, a genuine return from something real. Sometimes it is handled with a shrug, a brief acknowledgement that the status quo has been restored and we should all move on. The pattern of death and return in this show is so consistent that it becomes its own kind of running gag, though it is one that the show occasionally forgets to find funny. Brian Griffin's death and return is the most famous example, and the one that generated the most attention outside the show's regular audience. In the 12th season's Life of Brian, Brian was struck by a car and died. The scene was treated with genuine gravity. Stewie was devastated. The Griffin family mourned. A new dog named Vinny, voiced with Italian-American charm and a different kind of warmth than Brian brought, was brought in as his replacement. The show committed, for approximately 2 episodes, to the idea that Brian was gone. And then, 2 episodes later, in the Christmas episode Christmas Guy, Stewie used the time travel return pad he had encountered earlier to go back and prevent Brian's death. Brian was saved. He came home. Everything was exactly as it had been before the whole arc began. Vinny's time with the family was erased from the main timeline, though he continued to exist elsewhere in the show's universe. The response from viewers was intense. The death made national news and trended on social media. The return was met with equal intensity, though the tone shifted. Many viewers who had grieved the death found the quick reversal less of a relief and more of a betrayal. The death had asked them to invest in a permanent loss. The return told them that the investment was never going to pay off in the way they had been led to expect. What the Brian arc reveals, when you look at it without the emotional investment of watching it in real time, is something about how this show handles consequences. Big things can happen. Stakes can be raised. The audience can be made to feel that something meaningful is at stake. And then the thing can be undone, and the show can proceed as if the big thing never quite fully counted. This is not unique to Brian's death. It is a structural principle. Stewie kills Lois, and the follow-up episode, Lois Kills Stewie, are perhaps the most ambitious version of this pattern. Over 2 episodes, Stewie finally does what he has spent the entire run of the show trying to do. He kills his mother. He takes over the world. He becomes the dictator he always dreamed of being. The episodes are well-constructed and genuinely exciting, and they give the audience the experience of seeing Stewie's most fundamental ambition realized. The 2-part story has real momentum, real consequences. The world has changed. And then it is revealed that all of it was a simulation on Stewie's computer. None of it happened. The world is back to exactly the state it occupied before the first episode of the 2-parter began. The reset button is pressed completely. What the audience experienced over 2 episodes of apparent consequence was a contained fiction within a fiction, explicitly removed from the main timeline. The storytelling choice has logic to it. Stewie killing Lois would end one of the show's central relationships in a way that could not easily be sustained. The show could not permanently be the show about the family where the baby killed the mother, so the simulation provides a way to tell the story and then restore the baseline. But the cost is that the story becomes retroactively meaningless. The investment the audience made was spent on something that, within the show's own logic, did not happen. Characters who were killed and stayed dead are a much smaller group. Muriel Goldman's death in And Then There Were Fewer remained permanent. Diane Simmons's death in the same episode was permanent. The deaths that occurred in that episode were designed as permanent because they needed to be. The murder mystery genre requires real victims whose deaths anchor the story. A mystery where all the deaths are reversible is not really a mystery. The pattern of reversible death versus permanent death in Family Guy roughly correlates to how central the character was to the show's regular operation. Characters who served specific recurring functions in the comedic ecosystem of the show could not be permanently altered without changing what the show did each week. Characters who occupied a significant but more peripheral role could be ended because their absence, while felt, would not restructure the fundamental experience of watching. Brian was always an exception to this rule, because his relationship with Stewie was central to what the show had become by season 12. His permanent absence would have restructured the show more completely than the writers were willing to do. The reversal was, in that sense, a pragmatic choice as much as a creative one. There is a specific quality to watching a show that you know will not let permanent change happen. You can still be entertained, you can still laugh, can still find individual moments genuinely affecting, but the dramatic stakes are different. When you know that the character who seems to be dying will be back, when you know that the consequence that seems severe will be undone, when you know that the pattern of the world will reassert itself, you experience the show's emotional moments with a specific kind of pleasurable distance. You are moved without being committed. You feel the shape of the sadness without having to live in it. This might actually be why the show works so well as something to fall asleep to. The world of the town is a world where things happen and then return to themselves, where the patterns hold, where the recurring gags recur and the familiar relationships persist, and the house on Spooner Street maintains its specific gravity through everything that passes. It is a world where even death is temporary, and the fundamental arrangements of existence reassert themselves. There is a comfort in that beneath the comedy of it. Everything will be restored. The story will continue. The eye will open. Section 12. The orchestra beneath the noise. There is a reason Family Guy sounds the way it does. When you watch the show, especially in the early seasons, you might notice something working underneath everything else, something that elevates the comedy above what the writing alone could accomplish. It is not the voices, though the voices are extraordinary. It is not the animation, which has always been functional rather than beautiful. It is the music. The actual live orchestral music that has scored Family Guy since its first episode in January 1999, and which remains one of the show's most genuinely distinguished qualities even in its later, creatively diminished years. Most animated comedies working on a television budget use synthesized or library music. They do not commission original orchestral scores for individual episodes. The economics of television do not typically support a 60-piece orchestra. Family Guy does. It has always done this, and Seth MacFarlane has been explicit about why. The music plays it straight. While everything else in the show is chaos and absurdity and shock, the orchestra underneath it all behaves as though it is scoring a serious film. The dramatic moments get dramatic music. The action sequences get action music. The emotional beats get strings and woodwinds behaving exactly as they would in something that was earnestly trying to make you feel something. And the gap between the orchestral seriousness and the narrative ridiculousness is where a significant portion of the show's comedy lives. MacFarlane has articulated this principle directly in interviews. He said that even if the audience does not consciously register that they are hearing a real orchestra rather than synthesized music, on a subconscious level it creates a legitimacy for the show. It grounds the proceedings in something real. It tells you that what you are watching, however absurd, is being taken seriously by at least some of the people making it. The music does not wink at you. It does not signal that this is all a joke. It plays as if every moment matters, and that earnestness makes the joke land harder precisely because the joke itself is not earnest. The two composers who built this musical identity are Ron Jones and Walter Murphy, and they worked together on the show for its first 12 seasons, a collaboration that produced some of the most unexpectedly sophisticated television music of the era. Ron Jones had previously composed music for Star Trek: The Next Generation, a fact that becomes interesting when you consider that the 100th episode of Family Guy, a two-part special called Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie, features Jones paying direct homage to his own work from the Next Generation two-part episode The Best of Both Worlds. This is a composer layering his own professional history into a piece of music for an animated comedy. The depth of craft in that gesture is not something Family Guy talks about, but it is there. Walter Murphy's biography is its own piece of trivia. His most commercially famous work before Family Guy was a disco arrangement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, released in 1976 under the title A Fifth of Beethoven, which reached #1 on the Billboard charts and became one of the defining pieces of the disco era. The man who made one of the most recognizable pieces of music from the 1970s pop landscape then spent 20-plus years writing orchestral scores for a cartoon show about a talking dog and a genius baby. This is not a diminishment. The range required to move from A Fifth of Beethoven to the emotional underscore of a road to episode is considerable, and Murphy navigated it with evident pleasure. Together, Jones and Murphy gave the show a musical identity that is genuinely unusual in adult animation. They used jazz, they used big band arrangements, they used Broadway-style orchestrations, they used orchestral scoring drawn from classic Hollywood film music traditions. MacFarlane has discussed how he would bring them obscure musicals, the most unexpected and arcane material he could find, and ask them to write in those styles. The result, across 12 seasons, is a musical catalog of remarkable diversity. A single episode might move through reggae, classical baroque, a parody of a specific film score, a Broadway-style production number, and standard comedic underscore. The ability to do this with a live orchestra? In the 2-week window, the composers were typically given per episode itself, a remarkable luxury compared to the 2 or 3 days. Most television shows allocated for music required genuine musicians with genuine range. The production numbers that the show became known for in its early seasons relied entirely on this musical infrastructure. This house is freaking sweet. The production number from the episode Peter Peter, Caviar Eater in the second season is a fully orchestrated Broadway-style showstopper. It received an Emmy nomination in 2000 for Outstanding Original Music and Lyrics. The song You've Got a Lot to See, which plays in the Season 3 episode The Thin White Line, won the Emmy for Outstanding Music and Lyrics in 2002. Family Guy won an Emmy for a song when it was a show that many critics dismissed as juvenile. The music was never juvenile. The Christmas Time is Killing Us song from the Season 9 episode Road to the North Pole received a Grammy nomination in 2012 for Best Song Written for Visual Media. A Grammy nomination for a song from Family Guy. The dark, despairing, brilliantly constructed meditation on the cruelty of Christmas logistics that serves as that road to episode's centerpiece is genuinely one of the most accomplished pieces of music produced for an animated comedy in the 21st century. Its melody is catchy in the way that Broadway melodies are catchy. It sticks in your head because the musical construction is good, not because it has been artificially engineered to stick. The lyrics are sharp and funny and carry real darkness underneath them. The whole thing is a small masterpiece of the form that sits inside an episode that most people have seen for the road to adventures and the comedy, without fully registering what the music underneath them is actually doing. The Star Wars trilogy specials made the full scope of this musical capacity visible. Blue Harvest, the parody of A New Hope that aired in September 2007 as the 6th season premiere, used the actual John Williams score for most of its runtime. Not a parody of it. Not a version inspired by it. The actual original music, licensed from Lucasfilm and incorporated into the episode at the same cues where it appeared in the film. Walter Murphy arranged the Family Guy-specific pieces to match the Williams material seamlessly. The result is a parody that sounds like the thing it is parodying, which means that the comedy comes entirely from the images and dialogue, rather than from the music signaling that you should find something funny. The score plays the whole enterprise straight, and that straightness is a significant part of why the episode works as well as it does. The relationship between Family Guy and Lucasfilm that enabled the Star Wars episodes is one of the stranger production stories in animation history. For years, the show had been making Star Wars references in its regular episodes, and the frequency of those references eventually became a legal concern. Fox's legal department told the Family Guy production team that they needed to get clearance from Lucasfilm or the references would have to stop. MacFarlane and the writers assumed this was the end of the Star Wars jokes. Lucasfilm's response was unexpected. They said they liked the references and were happy to work with the production. George Lucas himself told MacFarlane in a conversation that he had been recording every episode of Family Guy without buying the DVDs. He was a fan. Not just an interested party, but a genuine viewer who watched the show regularly. With that blessing established, the 3 specials became possible. Blue Harvest was written in 4 weeks by Alex Sulkin, under MacFarlane's guidance, and directed by Dominic Polcino. It aired to commemorate the 30th anniversary of A New Hope. The audience response was strong enough that 2 sequels followed. Something, Dark Side for The Empire Strikes Back, and It's a Trap for Return of the Jedi. All 3 were released direct-to-video before being edited for television broadcast, and all 3 are now available collected as Laugh It Up, Fuzzball, The Family Guy Trilogy, a title taken from the insult Han Solo delivers to Chewbacca in The Empire Strikes Back. The specials introduced an interesting casting problem. Star Wars has a large cast of characters. Family Guy has a relatively small recurring cast. The specials solve this by double and triple casting characters, the same Family Guy character appearing as different Star Wars characters across the 3 episodes, and eventually, when they ran out of Family Guy characters entirely, by pulling in characters from American Dad and The Cleveland Show. Darth Vader correctly observes at one point in the 3rd special that they appear to have run out of Family Guy characters, which is one of the more quietly self-aware meta-comments the show has ever made. The joke is not that they ran out of characters. The joke is that the show acknowledges they ran out of characters while the story is still happening. The 4th wall breaks casually, is noted, and the story continues. The relationship with Seth Green is embedded in all 3 specials in its own recursive way. Seth Green voices Chris Griffin on Family Guy. Seth Green created Robot Chicken, which is an Adult Swim stop-motion parody series that had done its own Star Wars parody before Family Guy got to it. The first special ends with a meta-argument between Peter, voiced by MacFarlane, and Chris, voiced by Green, about whether the Robot Chicken Star Wars parodies are better than Family Guy's version. McFarlane's Peter dismisses Robot Chicken. Green's Chris defends it. The two performers are arguing, through their characters, about whose parody is better, knowing that the audience will find the argument funnier if they know who is voicing whom. It is a joke that is funny at the surface level and funnier the more you know about the people behind it. All of this, the music, the Star Wars specials, the meta jokes about the show's own production constraints, exists in a show that is frequently dismissed as lowest common denominator comedy. The dismissal is not entirely unfair. The show has produced episodes that genuinely are not trying to be anything more than cheap laughs. But the dismissal is also incomplete, because woven through the show's long history are these pockets of genuine craftsmanship, the music that plays the drama straight, the road to episodes that commit to real storytelling, the Star Wars specials that take the task of adapting beloved source material with real care, the Easter eggs designed for the audience paying the most attention. All of it suggests a creative operation that was, at its best, doing more than its reputation suggested. Section 13. The Voices That Built the World. Somewhere at the Rhode Island School of Design, a young Seth MacFarlane was walking through a building when he overheard a security guard talking. The security guard had a voice that did something specific. It was loud in a way that had no awareness of itself. It was a Rhode Island accent pushed past the point of modulation. It was the voice of a man who said things with complete confidence and absolutely no internal editing. The voice of someone who spoke before he thought and found no problem with that arrangement. MacFarlane listened to this man talking, and he heard Peter Griffin. Not the character. He had not invented the character yet. But he heard the voice that Peter Griffin would eventually use, the exact cadence and the exact quality of a specific kind of American man saying things at a specific kind of volume. Years later, that security guard's voice became one of the most recognizable in American entertainment. MacFarlane has spoken in interviews about how he chose to voice 4 of the show's main characters himself, Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire, because the voices he had already heard inside his own head for these characters were very specific, and he believed it would be more efficient to produce those specific things himself than to explain them to someone else and hope they understood. This was not arrogance. It was the practical decision of someone who had a precise creative vision and the vocal range to execute it. Stewie's voice came from a different source entirely. Rex Harrison, specifically Rex Harrison in My Fair Lady from 1964, provided the base inspiration. Harrison's Higgins had a particular quality of irritated superiority, of a man who was always operating under the assumption that the people around him were not living up to what they could be, of someone for whom disappointment in others was so constant, it had become a kind of ambient state. MacFarlane took that quality and combined it with the lower, menacing register of Mr. Burns from The Simpsons and arrived at Stewie, an infant who speaks like a disappointed Edwardian and schemes like a Bond villain. The fact that this combination works as well as it does is one of the genuinely strange creative successes in the show's history. Brian requires the least explanation. MacFarlane voices Brian in his regular speaking voice. This is worth sitting with for a moment. Peter Griffin is a performance. Stewie Griffin is a performance. Quagmire is a performance. Brian Griffin is Seth MacFarlane talking. Which means that Brian, the character who is most explicitly the author's voice within the show, the liberal intellectual dog, the failed writer, the one who tries to be more sophisticated than his circumstances, the one who has strong opinions about things and expresses them at length, is the character who is most literally Seth MacFarlane. The casting of Brian is the show's most direct acknowledgement of what the show actually is, the work of a man who sees himself, at least in part, as Brian, and who uses Brian as the vehicle for his own perspective. The rest of the principal cast came from across the industry, with stories that illuminate the show's early character. Alex Borstein arrived at Family Guy through a connection to the early sketch comedy circuit in Los Angeles, specifically a recommendation from the Mad TV network, where she was performing at the time. She had not met MacFarlane, had not seen his work, and the pilot she read for was, as she later described it, really sight unseen. The voice she brought to Lois was based on a cousin from Great Neck, New York. A specific and recognizable quality that MacFarlane's response to was to ask her to make it less annoying and significantly faster, on the theory that a slower version would extend every episode by approximately 4 hours. Seth Green's story of auditioning for Chris Griffin is one of the more entertainingly strange in the show's casting history. He was dared by a friend, while preparing for the audition, to do his best impression of Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs. This is an impression of a serial killer character notable for unusual and disturbing behaviors. Green decided to do the impression in the room. The producers responded to it. Chris Griffin's voice, the slightly strange quality it has, the way his enthusiasm occasionally reads as something not quite right, traces back to Seth Green doing a serial killer impression in an audition room because a friend told him to. Mike Henry, who came to the show through a personal connection with MacFarlane from their time at the Rhode Island School of Design, ended up voicing a remarkable collection of characters. Herbert, the show's darkly comic old man character; Bruce, the soft-spoken and perpetually understated character known for his line, "No thank you"; Consuela, the recurring cleaning woman; the greased-up deaf guy; and, for the first 18 seasons, Cleveland Brown. Henry announced in 2020 that he would no longer voice Cleveland, responding to the broader industry conversation about white voice actors voicing black characters. Cleveland was subsequently recast with Arif Zahir, a decision that reflected an industry-wide reassessment of casting practices that had been standard for decades. Patrick Warburton, who voices Joe Swanson, brings a very specific quality to the character that no one who has heard Warburton's voice in other contexts could possibly miss. Warburton has a voice built for exactly one kind of character, the supremely confident, slightly square, absolutely earnest man who is always positive he is right. He played this character in Seinfeld as Elaine's boyfriend, David Puddy. He played versions of it in numerous other projects. And Joe Swanson is the perfect Family Guy deployment of that voice, a paraplegic police officer who brings exactly the same level of absolute, unquestioning certainty to every situation, regardless of how the situation should make him feel. The joke of Joe is partly the voice's incongruity with his circumstances. A man who moves through the world with the confident physicality of Warburton's vocal performance while being unable to physically move through the world in the ways that voice implies. Mila Kunis taking over the role of Meg from Lacey Chabert after the first season created a continuity that few viewers noticed. Chabert's commitments to Party of Five and her own academic schedule made continuing on Family Guy difficult. Kunis auditioned for the role and was asked to come back twice before MacFarlane hired her, the first time to speak more slowly, the second time to enunciate more clearly. She has voiced Meg ever since, navigating the character's increasingly difficult narrative position across multiple seasons, with a consistency that the character's treatment has not always deserved. Kunis has spoken publicly about the experience of having Peter's dismissive catchphrase directed at her by real people she encountered, a consequence of the character's abuse becoming culturally ambient enough to bleed into the real world. What all of these voices collectively built is a sound, a very specific sound that exists when you put them all together in a scene. The particular quality of the Griffin family in conversation, the way the voices interact and contrast with each other, is something that became embedded in American television culture across 25 years of consistent exposure. You could probably identify the show from 2 seconds of audio. This is not something most television achieves. It requires voices that are not just distinctive individually, but that form a specific ecology when combined, where each voice plays against the others in ways that amplify what all of them are doing. MacFarlane has said that his favorite character to voice is Brian. Not because Brian is the most fun to perform, but because Brian is the character he can say the most through. The character as a literal vehicle, the thing you drive to get where you are going. And what you are going toward is the opportunity to say something the show would not otherwise be able to say. Whether that assessment of Brian holds throughout the show's run, whether Brian consistently carries the weight of genuine insight rather than just the weight of MacFarlane's opinions rendered as dialogue, is debatable. But the intention is clear, and the intention traces back to that voice, the one that required no performance, the one that was just the man himself, talking. Section 14. The Simpsons in the Room. You cannot talk about Family Guy's history without eventually talking about the elephant in the room, or more accurately, the yellow cartoon family in the room. The Simpsons has been on the air since the 17th of December 1989. It invented, or at least perfected to the point of codification, the template for animated family comedies on American primetime television. a lovable but flawed patriarch, a more patient and capable wife, children with distinct personalities, a supporting cast of memorable recurring characters, jokes that combined satirical intelligence with broad physical comedy, and heart that the characters earned through specific relationships rather than claimed through generic sentiment. Family Guy arrived a decade later and was immediately compared to it, sometimes favorably and sometimes not. The comparison created a rivalry that the show addressed directly and repeatedly across its run. South Park famously attacked Family Guy in a 2006 two-part episode that depicted Family Guy's jokes as being generated by manatees, pushing idea balls together at random, a satirical claim that the comedy was algorithmically produced rather than actually written. MacFarlane responded to this in various ways over the years, most directly by continuing to make the show and allowing the audience to decide which assessment was more accurate. Family Guy's relationship with The Simpsons reached a strange peak in September 2014 with the crossover episode The Simpsons Guy, which premiered as the season 13 opener. The episode ran 44 minutes, making it the longest episode in Family Guy's history at that point. It was written by Family Guy writer Patrick Meighan and directed by Peter Shin, with The Simpsons executive producers given approval to tweak specific lines. The decision about how to approach the crossover was itself revealing. The Simpsons creative team essentially told Family Guy's writers they had free rein to do whatever they wanted with Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, and Maggie, specifically because they did not consider the episode canon to The Simpsons. It was a Family Guy episode that happened to have Simpsons characters in it, operating according to Family Guy's rules, in Family Guy's aesthetic and tonal register. The Simpsons characters entered the story as visitors from another way of doing things, and the episode's comedy came substantially from the collision between those two ways. The casting of the crossover created a set of structural analogs that the episode explored. Peter and Homer as two versions of the clueless television patriarch, Stewie and Bart as two versions of the troublemaker child, Meg and Lisa as two versions of the misunderstood family outcast. The analogs were not exact, the shows are different in ways that their surface similarities obscure, and the episode was at its most interesting when it used those differences to create friction rather than harmony. Homer throws his Emmy Award trophies at Peter during their fight. Peter, struck by them, says, "That's not fair, I don't got none of them." This is one of the most compact, self-aware moments in Family Guy's history. An acknowledgement, delivered in the voice of the show's protagonist, of the show's own critical position relative to its main cultural rival. The Simpsons has won Emmys. Family Guy has been nominated, including for Outstanding Comedy Series, a historic nomination that happened in 2009 but has not won for the show itself. The Emmy trophies as weapons in a fight between the two shows' protagonists is Family Guy putting its own cultural position in a blunt and funny visual. Lisa Simpson takes Meg under her wing during the crossover and teaches her the saxophone. This moment, while brief, is one of the episode's most purely affecting. Meg and Lisa are both characters whose depth is often undersold by the shows they inhabit. Both are positioned as the intelligent and feeling ones in families that do not always make space for intelligence and feeling, and their brief alliance in the crossover episode gestures at what both of them could be given more consistent creative attention. Meg learns from Lisa that she has musical ability. The episode ends before we learn what Meg does with that. The fight between Homer and Peter at the episode's climax runs for approximately 8 minutes and covers most of Springfield. It is scored and paced like the chicken fights and action sequence, played with complete visual seriousness, while the premise around it is deliberately absurd. The trigger of the fight is a legal dispute about whether Pawtucket Patriot Ale, the beer from the Griffin family's world, is a knockoff of Duff Beer, the beer from Springfield. The lawsuit is a meta-joke about the most frequently raised criticism of Family Guy, that it was derivative of The Simpsons, that it copied the template without the craft rendered as a beer licensing dispute. Family Guy pled not guilty to being a ripoff through its protagonist's voice, while simultaneously staging the argument as the kind of escalating physical comedy that its critics have always said Family Guy does better than the other things it attempts. The episode concluded with Homer and Peter in quiet acknowledgement of each other, ending the fight without a winner, agreeing that their shows should remain a half-hour apart in the schedule with a pile of garbage between them. It is simultaneously a joke about television scheduling and a statement about the relationship between the two shows, adjacent, mutually aware, not the same, and perhaps most comfortable at a small and permanent distance. Section 15. What it means to watch for a quarter century. At some point in the long life of a television show, watching it stops being an individual act and becomes a collective one. Family Guy has been on the air for 25 years. There are people who were in elementary school when the first episode premiered in January 1999 who now have children of their own who have started watching the show. There are people who watched it when it first aired, forgot about it when it was canceled, were pulled back in by the Adult Swim reruns in 2003, and have been watching ever since in a relationship with the show that now spans more than 2 decades. There are people who have never watched it live on Fox but have seen dozens of episodes through streaming and YouTube clips and late-night ambient television. The show exists simultaneously in all of these viewing modes, and all of them are equally valid. What does it mean to have watched something this long? It means that the show has become part of the furniture of your life in a way that newer things cannot replicate. The jokes from the early seasons are not just jokes you found funny. They are memories. They are associated with the specific circumstances in which you first heard them, who you were with, where you were, what that period of your life felt like. A cutaway from the second season is not just a cutaway. It is a time capsule. It carries the weight of everything happening in the world and in your specific life when you first watched it, and when you return to it now, you return to both the joke and everything that surrounded the joke. The show knows this about itself, on some level. The episode Back to the Pilot is literally about this phenomenon, going back to the show's own beginning and standing in it while being conscious of what came after. The years of episodes after the pilot are the context that makes the return to the pilot meaningful. Without the distance between then and now, the episode is just fan service. With the distance, it is something slightly more interesting. An acknowledgement that what you are watching has accumulated weight, that the beginning is richer in retrospect than it was at the time because you now know what grew from it. The voice of Peter Griffin that Seth MacFarlane based on a security guard he overheard in Rhode Island has become one of the most distinctive sounds in American popular culture. The image of a baby in a yellow shirt plotting world domination is immediately recognizable to hundreds of millions of people across dozens of countries. A drawing of a white dog sitting in a chair with a wine glass has accumulated so much cultural meaning through repetition and context that it no longer needs any of that context to communicate. The images and sounds and catchphrases and recurring gags of Family Guy have become part of the shared vocabulary of contemporary English language culture. They are references people make. They are comparisons people draw. They are the things people say when they want to signal that they know something, that they were watching, that they were part of the audience. There is a specific quality to the affection people have for this show that differs from their affection for genuinely acclaimed television dramas or prestige comedies. Nobody feels personal warmth for Breaking Bad the way people feel personal warmth for Family Guy. You can admire Breaking Bad. You can respect it. You can be moved by it and changed by it. But Family Guy people have for a show that they can watch without having to think very hard, that is always there, that has a specific rhythm they know, that will not demand emotional investment they cannot currently give. It is the television equivalent of comfort food, not the most nutritious option, not trying to be, but meeting a real need in a real way for a real number of people across a genuinely impressive span of time. The patterns we have talked about throughout this video are the architecture of that comfort. The chicken that always comes back, the gag that always returns, the house that is always there, the characters who are always essentially themselves, the world that resets, the eye that opens. These are not weaknesses in the storytelling. They are the features that make the storytelling comfortable. They are what allows the show to function as ambient television, as background company, as something to put on when you want the feeling of familiar presence without the demand of sustained attention. There is a Spooner Street in a fictional Rhode Island town, and it has been there every Sunday night for a quarter of a century, lit from inside, the television on, someone making a bad decision somewhere. The town has never quite had one fixed name in this telling. We have avoided the specific word that designates it. Not out of disrespect, but out of a different way of seeing it, a way that allows it to be the town that every viewer who has spent time with it has made their own, decorated with their own associations and memories and the specific moments that made them laugh or cringe or feel something unexpected. That town belongs to a remarkable number of people, and the patterns that run through it, the ones we have spent this entire video exploring, are what makes it belong to them. The patterns are the promise. The patterns are the reason to return. The patterns are the comfort of knowing that when you come back, the house will be there, the dog will be sitting in a chair with something he should not be drinking, the baby will be in his crib with his impossible devices, and everything will be roughly as it was, ready to begin again. Section 16. The voice of a security guard and everything that followed. Let us come back to the beginning, not the beginning of the show, the beginning of the idea of the show, which is a slightly different place. It is sometime in the early 1990s. Seth MacFarlane is a student at the Rhode Island School of Design, studying animation, doing what art school students do, learning a craft, developing a sensibility, figuring out what kind of thing he wants to make. And somewhere in one of those school buildings, he walks past a security guard talking and hears a voice. That voice contains Peter Griffin. Not yet named, not yet drawn, not yet attached to any story or any family or any fictional town. But the voice is there, the specific combination of Rhode Island accent and absolute self-confidence and complete absence of internal editing that will eventually become the sound of one of the most recognizable television characters of the last 25 years. MacFarlane graduates. He goes to work at Hanna-Barbera, the studio responsible for some of the most widely seen animation in the history of American television. He works on Dexter's Laboratory. He works on Johnny Bravo. He works on Cow and Chicken. He is learning, inside an industrial production environment, how animation actually gets made at scale. He is absorbing the conventions of the form and building the professional foundations that will eventually support everything that follows. He makes a short film for his thesis at RISD called The Life of Larry. The short features a middle-aged man named Larry and his dog Steve. If you watch this film, you can see Peter Griffin and Brian Griffin in embryonic form, not yet themselves, not yet full, but recognizably the templates from which they would be developed. The thesis film was submitted, through MacFarlane's professor, to Hanna-Barbera. Hanna-Barbera hired him. He made a sequel short called Larry and Steve, which aired in 1997 on Cartoon Network. Fox executives saw the Larry shorts. They contracted MacFarlane to develop a series based on the characters. The proposed format was a 15-minute pilot, with Fox providing $50,000 to produce it. MacFarlane made the pilot at home. He animated it himself. He voiced multiple characters himself. He submitted it to Fox. They liked it. They commissioned a full series. Family Guy had its green light. The first episode aired on the 31st of January 1999, immediately following Super Bowl 33. The placement was not accidental. Fox put the show after the biggest audience event in American television, knowing that whatever ran after the Super Bowl would be seen by more people than it might ever reach again under normal circumstances. 22 million people watched the first episode of Family Guy. Under any standard measure, that is a successful premiere. And then it went away. Not immediately, not overnight, but across the next 3 years, the show struggled with scheduling instability, competition from established programs, and an audience that could not locate it reliably enough to build the numbers Fox needed. By 2002, after 3 seasons, the network canceled it. The assumption in the industry was that this was the permanent end. The Adult Swim years are worth pausing on, because what happened with Family Guy on Adult Swim between 2003 and 2005 is genuinely unusual in the history of American television. Adult Swim, the Cartoon Network programming block aimed at older viewers, acquired the rerun rights to Family Guy for what the network's own programming chief described as almost nothing. The rights were cheap because Fox did not expect them to be valuable. The reruns premiered in April 2003. The viewing numbers were immediate and dramatic. Family Guy became the most watched program on the Adult Swim block. It boosted the block's overall viewership by nearly 240%. The show that had been canceled for insufficient audiences was, in reruns, attracting more viewers than anything else in its late-night cable slot. Simultaneously, DVD sales for the first and second season's physical disc sales, in the era just before streaming changed how people accessed archived television, were strong enough to generate real commercial attention. People were buying the show. Not renting it, not sampling it, buying it, which meant they wanted it permanently available, which meant they were fans in the committed sense that distinguished audiences who would follow a show from audiences who would watch it passively if it happened to be on. These two data points, together Adult Swim ratings and DVD sales, gave Fox the evidence it needed to reconsider. A show that nobody had expected to come back was demonstrating a loyal and enthusiastic audience that had either been there all along or had been created by the reruns and the physical media. In 2004, Fox ordered new episodes. The fourth season would air in 2005. Family Guy was coming back. This story, the cancellation and revival and second chance, became embedded in the show's identity in a specific way. The show after the revival was not exactly the same as the show before the cancellation, as the transcript we have been working from extensively details. The 3-year gap scattered the writing staff. New writers arrived with new sensibilities. The character who came back to the air in 2005 was slightly different from the character who had left in 2002, and those slight differences would amplify across seasons into more significant divergences. But the fact of the return remained central to how the show understood itself. It had been taken away, it had proved its worth in absence, it had been given back. The revival gave Family Guy something that most shows never have: a mythology about its own survival. The story of why the show exists in the form it does now is not just the story of someone pitching something successfully. It is a story about an audience that loved something enough to keep watching it in reruns, to buy it on physical media, to make its continued existence financially defensible in the face of institutional indifference. The people who watched Family Guy on Adult Swim at midnight in 2003 and 2004 are, in a meaningful sense, the reason the show exists as a cultural institution rather than as a footnote about a canceled animated comedy from 1999. That is a remarkable thing for an audience to have done. And it created between the show and its viewers a relationship with a specific character, a relationship of mutual loyalty, of "you were here when it mattered," that persisted through the years when the show's creative quality declined, and the audience had reasons to walk away. Some of them did walk away. The ratings tell that story clearly. But the ones who stayed carried with them a history that went beyond what the current episodes were providing, a memory of what the show had been and what it had meant that the current episodes were borrowing against even when they were not earning it. The security guard's voice, the $50,000 pilot, the Super Bowl time slot, the cancellation, the midnight reruns on a cable block that nobody expected to matter, the DVD sales, the return, the second cancellation that never came, the quarter-century of production that followed, the giant chicken that appeared and always came back, the baby who created the universe, the dog who kept trying to write something real, the Easter eggs hidden in the background of episodes that most people would never pause to read, the music, the real orchestra playing everything straight while the chaos played itself out in front of it, all of it flows from that moment in a school building in Rhode Island. A young man walking through a hallway, hearing a voice, and understanding immediately that the voice contained something he wanted to use. The instinct to say yes to that voice, to build a world around it, to spend decades finding out what that world contained, that instinct produced Family Guy. And the world it produced has been one of the strangest and most persistently strange places in the history of American television. The patterns we have spent this video tracing are the shapes that world made as it grew. They are the proof that something was being built, even when the building was not always done well, even when the materials were sometimes bad, even when the architect had moved on to other projects and left the work to others who knew the floor plan but not the original vision. The patterns remained. They persist. They continue to organize the experience of watching the show into something that feels against all logic and expectation, like home. Section 17. The deepest pattern. We have been here for a long time now. We have walked the length of a fictional town that exists in that particular Rhode Island of the mind, a town built from a security guard's voice in a student animator's thesis film, and $50,000 and a Super Bowl time slot and an improbable rescue by a midnight cable block that nobody expected to matter. We have sat with the chicken and the expired coupon and the 25 years of consequence that followed from one small act of absurd stubbornness. We have considered the language of a baby who may have created everything, including the universe in which he himself was eventually born. We have traced the music that plays everything straight while the comedy plays itself out in front of it. We have followed two different shaped creatures through multiple versions of the world they inhabit, in search of a home they were already in. We have read the messages written too small to read at normal speed. We have noticed the balloon count stop at exactly the right number. We have found the Gumball to Gumball reference and understood what it meant about the distance between failure and success, and between the failure and the success in the same person's life. We have traced gags from their first appearances to their exhaustion, and in some cases to beyond their exhaustion, and found that the best of them became something that no longer required the original joke to function. They became language. They became the shorthand of a shared experience accumulated across years of watching the same fictional family do things that should not be surprising anymore and are somehow never entirely predictable. We have sat with the fact that the man who created all of this almost did not survive a September morning in 2001. That he survived because of a hangover and a clerical error, and that everything we have been discussing for this entire video is downstream of those two small accidents of human imperfection. And now we are at the end, which means it is time to say what the deepest pattern actually is. The deepest pattern in Family Guy is not the chicken that keeps coming back, though that is one expression of it. It is not the gags that return, or the house that stays on its corner, or the characters who are resurrected, or the eye that opens. These are all expressions of something underneath them, something that the show has been illustrating without naming for 25 years. The deepest pattern is this. Things that people genuinely care about do not disappear easily. The show was canceled, the audience kept watching it, the show came back, the writers changed, the characters changed. The quality fluctuated in ways that any honest accounting has to acknowledge. And the audience, enough of it, kept returning. Not because every new episode was great, often they were not, but because the thing they cared about was still in there somewhere, even when it was buried under choices that had moved away from what made it matter. The chicken kept fighting because Peter kept letting him come back. The gags kept returning because the audience kept recognizing them and feeling something when they did. The house on Spooner Street kept its lights on because there were always people willing to stay inside it, even when the furniture got rearranged and the occupants began to feel like different versions of themselves. This is not just a pattern in a television show. It is a pattern in the way people relate to things they have chosen to care about. The choosing is not always rational. The object of the caring is not always deserving, but the caring itself creates a kind of resilience in the relationship, a capacity to keep returning, to keep finding what you need in what is there, even when what is there has changed from what first made you stay. Family Guy has been on the air for 25 years because enough people, across enough time, cared enough to keep the relationship going. They did it through the cancellations and the resurrections and the creative peaks and the long valleys and the moments that were indefensible and the moments that were quietly extraordinary. They did it because caring is its own momentum, and momentum is very hard to stop. The town on Spooner Street is still there. The house is lit from within. Something is always happening inside it, and you know what is going to happen when the chicken shows up. You know the gag before it lands. You know the rhythm before the music cues up. You know the shape of this world before any particular episode has started, because you have been here long enough to know it. That knowing is the gift. That knowing is what 25 years of watching something feels like. That knowing, that comfort, that sense of returning to a place that has never been entirely yours but has always been somehow available, is what the patterns have been building toward all this time. Whoever you are, wherever you are watching from, whatever time it is in your corner of the world right now, I hope this has been a good companion for wherever your evening is taking you. The house is there. The patterns persist. The eye opens. Sleep well. If you made it all the way to the end of this, you are genuinely one of the people this channel is for. The long, slow, thorough exploration of something that deserves more careful attention than it usually gets, that is what we do here. If you found something tonight that changed the way you think about this show, or reminded you of a moment you had forgotten, or gave you a new angle on something you thought you already understood completely, drop it in the comments. I read them. And if you have not subscribed yet, there is a button somewhere nearby that makes the next video appear in your feed automatically, which costs nothing, and is the simplest thing you can do to keep this kind of content coming. Take care of yourselves out there. Additional section, the animation that changed and what it cost. There is a version of Family Guy that exists in the memories of people who watched the show in its first few years, and it looks slightly different from the version those same people watch now. The difference is subtle enough that you might not consciously register it if you went back and watched a Season 2 episode after spending years with the current show, but something in you would register it. Something about the way the characters move, the way the outlines feel on the screen, the particular quality of the light in the backgrounds. The early seasons of Family Guy have a texture that later seasons do not have, and that texture is bound up with the animation style that Rough Draft Studios brought to the second and third seasons of the show's original run. Animation historians tend to talk about different studios as bringing different energies to the same character designs, the same way that different musicians bring different interpretations to the same piece of music. Rough Draft Studios, which handled the animation for the second and third seasons, gave Family Guy its loosest and most expressive period. The characters in those seasons moved with a slight unpredictability that made them feel alive, in a way that later, more technically polished animation did not always replicate. There was an off-model quality in those seasons that sounds like a criticism but was actually a feature. The moments when a character's face was slightly more exaggerated than it should have been, or a movement was slightly more fluid than the design technically allowed, gave the comedy an organic quality that precision erases. When the show returned from its first cancellation in 2005, the animation was different, cleaner. The outlines were still thick, but they had a different quality to them. The movements were more controlled. The design had been standardized in ways that made the characters more consistent from scene to scene, but also slightly stiffer. Some viewers noted this immediately. Others took several seasons to consciously articulate what they were sensing. The shift to high-definition production, which occurred gradually through the late 2000s and became fully realized around the 8th season in 2009 and 2010, brought its own set of changes. HD allowed for more detail in the backgrounds, smoother lines on the character outlines, richer colors across the board. The show looked more expensive. In purely technical terms, it looked better. But technical improvement and aesthetic quality are not the same thing, and the scrappy handmade quality of the early seasons, the sense that the animation was being made by people who were invested in making it rather than executing a standardized production pipeline, was something the HD transition could not preserve. By the time the current version of the show's animation style settled into place, somewhere around the 9th or 10th season, the visual texture was comfortable and professional and competent. Characters moved predictably. Faces expressed what they were meant to express. The backgrounds were detailed and consistent. Nothing was surprising. Nothing was slightly wrong in the way that slightly wrong things are sometimes more alive than things that are entirely right. The animation changes are worth understanding as part of the broader pattern of the show's evolution, because they track something that was happening in the writing and the character work simultaneously. The early seasons had an improvised quality, a sense of people finding the show's voice by making the show rather than following an established playbook. The later seasons had the playbook and were executing it efficiently. Both have their virtues. The efficiency of the later production was what allowed the show to keep going for 25 years without burning out its creative team. The improvised quality of the early production was what made the show feel special. These things are almost always mutually exclusive. You can have a show that feels like it is being discovered, or you can have a show that knows exactly what it is doing. What you cannot usually have is both at once, because knowing what you are doing means you have stopped discovering it. Family Guy was at its most vital when it was figuring itself out. That is not an unusual thing to say about a creative work. It is also not a criticism so much as an observation about what vitality costs and what it produces. Town that founded itself. The fictional town in Rhode Island where Family Guy is set has an origin story that the show established deep in its mythology, in a detail that most viewers would be forgiven for missing because it is not the kind of information the show puts in the foreground. The town was founded by an ancestor of Peter Griffin named Griffin Peterson. This fact is established through the show's internal history and creates a specific kind of recursion that rewards thinking about. Peter Griffin's life in the town is not merely the story of a person in a place. It is the story of a person in a place that his own family created, a place whose existence is bound up with his own bloodline, a place where he belongs, not just because he happens to live there, but because in a foundational sense, the place was made for someone like him to exist in. Griffin Peterson is not a character who appears in the show with any regularity. He is more of a reference point, a way for the show to establish that the Griffin family's connection to this fictional corner of Rhode Island predates the present-day story. It is the animated equivalent of those small towns across New England where a particular family name appears on multiple roads and buildings and historical markers, because the family was there first and the town grew up around their presence. The detail creates a kind of mythological depth to a setting that mostly operates as backdrop. The town is not just where the Griffins happen to live. It is, in some sense, where they have always been and where they belong in a way that is more ancient than any single character's biography. Peter drinks at the Drunken Clam because the town was made by and for people like Peter to drink at places like the Drunken Clam. The connections are circular and self-reinforcing. The world of the show is organized around the persistence of a family in a place, and the place itself was organized around the family. This is not an observation the show has ever made explicitly. It is the kind of thing that emerges from the accumulated details of 25 years of world building, much of it accidental, some of it intentional, all of it contributing to a sense that the fictional place has its own history and logic that extend beyond any particular episode's requirements. When you have been watching a show for long enough, and when the show has been running for long enough to have developed this depth, the world starts to feel real in the specific way that fictional worlds feel real when they have been inhabited continuously for a long time. The town's relationship to the real state of Rhode Island has its own texture. Seth MacFarlane spent formative years in Rhode Island, and there are real landmarks embedded in the fictional geography. The Pawtucket Patriot Brewery that Peter works at reflects the actual Pawtucket, Rhode Island, a city with a working-class industrial history. Providence, where MacFarlane studied, is close enough to the fictional setting to have influenced the show's sense of what a New England city of this scale feels like. The specific combination of ambition and limitation, of a place that knows it is not a great city but has a fierce local pride anyway, runs through the show's setting in ways that feel earned by actual knowledge rather than performed. Small places in New England have a particular quality of density, not physical density but temporal density, the feeling that many generations of the same families have been living in the same houses, on the same streets for long enough that the past is very close to the present. Rhode Island is the smallest state, and the smallest states feel the weight of their own history most directly. The fictional town in the show carries some of this quality. It has a past. It has families that have been there for a long time. The town's own history anchors the story's present tense in a way that gives the current episodes a kind of rootedness that more deliberately constructed fictional settings often lack. This is all background. It is all the stuff that you absorb without being aware you are absorbing it, that contributes to the sense that you are watching a world that has depth rather than a set that has been built for the convenience of the story. The best long-running shows build this depth over time, and Family Guy, for all its inconsistencies, has been building it for 25 years. The accumulated details, the cross-references, the history that emerges from the aggregate of episodes create a fictional place that functions as a real place does in the imagination, as somewhere that exists continuously, even when you are not watching it. Additional section: the patterns in the specific episodes. There are certain episodes in the show's long history that function less like individual stories and more like documents episodes that, when you look at them carefully, reveal the shape of what the show was at that moment, what it was thinking about, how it understood itself. Brian and Stewie from the 8th season is one of these. It is the episode that stripped away everything: the cutaway gags, the secondary storylines, the supporting cast, the comedic escalation of the usual Family Guy episode, and left only two characters in a single location talking. Brian and Stewie are locked in a bank vault overnight. The vault is where they spend the entire episode. There is no other setting, there is nothing else happening. It is just the two of them, in a room, having honest conversations about things that the show almost never allows anyone to be honest about. Brian reveals that he keeps a gun in a safe deposit box in the vault. He keeps it there because he has, at specific moments in his life, thought seriously about using it on himself. The episode handles this with more directness than most television would allow for a subject of this weight. Stewie's response to learning this is to take the gun and hide it, not as a dramatic gesture but as the act of a character who has just learned something about his best friend that he does not know how to process except through action. The scene is quiet and strange and genuinely affecting in a way that the show's surrounding episodes rarely achieved. Stewie tells Brian how much he means to him. This is also handled with more directness than the show usually allows. Stewie is not performing. He is not being ironic. He is telling the truth about the emotional reality of his relationship with this particular person, and the truth he tells is that Brian is essential to him in a way that Stewie has not previously stated with this kind of clarity. The episode won significant critical attention and is routinely cited by people who have watched the show seriously as one of the clearest pieces of evidence for what Family Guy was capable of when it decided to try something different. It is also an episode that sits in complete isolation in the show's broader history. Its emotional honesty does not carry into the episodes around it. Its revelations are not integrated into the larger story. The things Stewie and Brian said to each other in that vault did not visibly change how they treat each other afterward. The show could not sustain what Brian and Stewie demonstrated was possible, but it could make it once, and the once is still there, still available, still the same episode. It was the first time anyone watched it. Road to Rhode Island established a format. Road to the Multiverse pushed that format to its technical and creative limits. Brian and Stewie stepped entirely outside the format and found something the format could not contain. These 3 episodes together describe the arc of what the Brian-Stewie relationship was capable of becoming, and they suggest that if the show had consistently operated at the level its best episodes demonstrated, it would have been one of the genuinely great American comedies of its era, rather than a great American comedy that was also frequently a much less great American comedy. And then there were fewer demonstrated something different. The show's ability, when given enough time and enough creative investment, to tell a complete and satisfying genre story using its own characters. The Season 9 premiere is a feature-length mystery, 44 minutes, structured as an Agatha Christie-style locked-room whodunit at an isolated manor. Characters die and stay dead. The mystery has a real solution with real internal logic. The episode was announced by Seth MacFarlane on Twitter as canon, a direct statement that this was not a one-off special but something that would have permanent consequences in the show's continuity. Those consequences did hold. Diane Simmons, the news co-anchor, died in the episode and did not come back. Muriel Goldman died and did not come back. James Woods died and then came back, which is perhaps the most James Woods thing that could happen in a story about James Woods, but his subsequent returns were treated as special occurrences rather than normal continuity. The episode proved that the show could commit to consequences when it decided to. The selective nature of that commitment, some deaths stuck. Some did not reflected the show's broader pattern of applying its own rules inconsistently, but the episode's willingness to make the commitment at all was itself notable. Back to the Pilot has already been discussed in this video in the context of Stewie's time machine, but it deserves a second mention here in the context of what it says about the show's relationship to its own past. The episode is a meditation on time, on change, on what it means that the show exists both in the version of itself from 1999 and the version of itself from 2012. When Brian and Stewie walk around inside the first episode of the show, they are doing something that no character in any other narrative can do. They are inhabiting the history of the work they are part of. They can see what the show was from inside the show at the moment they are making it. This is a unique kind of self-awareness, and the episode uses it to make a point about the dangers of trying to correct the past without understanding the full consequences of correction. The specific form of the moral that warning your past self about a genuine catastrophe will have unpredictable results maps onto the show's relationship with its own creative history. Could the show have been warned about the decisions that would damage it? Could the characters have been told what they would become and asked to stay closer to who they were? The episode's answer is essentially no. The past is the past, and interference creates more problems than it solves, and the correct response to a world with flaws is not to go back and try to fix it, but to move forward with the knowledge of what went wrong. As advice for a television show, it is both honest and slightly melancholy. The things that went wrong. The patterns that persist are what persist. The eye opens. Additional section, late nights, and the specific quality of Family Guy at 2 in the morning. There is a time of night when Family Guy is doing something specifically useful, not in the sense that it is being good television in the conventional way, not in the sense that it is offering you something that will expand your understanding or challenge your assumptions or leave you thinking about a difficult question. At a certain hour, and you probably know the hour, Family Guy is doing something simpler and more specific. It is being there. The Adult Swim reruns that saved the show between 2003 and 2005 were not airing in prime time. They were airing late at night, in the blocks of programming that Cartoon Network used to reach the specific demographic of viewers who were awake past midnight and wanted company that did not demand anything from them. Family Guy in that slot was not being watched the way people watch appointment television. It was being watched the way people leave the television on, when they cannot sleep, or when they do not want to be alone with their thoughts, or when they need something in the corner of the room that will produce familiar sounds without requiring them to be fully present. This is a specific kind of television consumption, and it is a legitimate one, and Family Guy is extraordinarily good at it. The show's structure, the rapid alternation between plot fragments and cutaway gags, the recurring patterns and familiar voices and comfortable rhythms, makes it well suited to the kind of viewing where you are partially present and partially somewhere else. You do not need to have seen the beginning of the episode to follow what is happening in the middle. You do not need to have been paying close attention 5 minutes ago to get the joke that is happening right now. The show is designed, whether intentionally or not, to be navigable at partial attention. The familiar voices of Peter and Brian and Stewie and Lois are, at a certain hour, simply companionable sounds. They are evidence that something recognizable is still operating in the world. This is not a small thing. A lot of people use television this way not as a primary activity, but as background company, as ambient evidence of a shared world, as something that confirms through its familiar patterns that the world is still operating the way they expect it to. Family Guy is exceptionally good at being this kind of television, and the show's very long run means that its familiar patterns have had 25 years to become deeply familiar to a very large number of people. The sleep-friendly quality of the show is not accidental, exactly, but it is also not something that was deliberately designed. It emerged from the show's specific combination of features: the rhythm of the cutaway structure, the comfortable predictability of the recurring gags, the consistent voices, the house on Spooner Street that is always there. These features were designed for comedy, but they also happen to create an experience that is well suited to the specific circumstances of late-night viewing. What this means for the experience of watching the show late at night, in the particular circumstances where it is most comfortable, is that the patterns we have spent this video discussing are doing their best work. The chicken fight pattern is most effective when you know it is coming and can relax into the expectation. The knee injury gag is most comfortable when you recognize it immediately and can ride the familiar rhythm of it. The road to episodes, with their specific emotional warmth and their commitment to two characters having real conversations, are most affecting when your defenses are slightly down, and the late hour has made you more open to the small moments of genuine feeling that the show occasionally produces. Family Guy is, among many other things, a show for people who need company. It has been that for 25 years. The Adult Swim viewers who found it in 2003 were people who needed something in the room with them at midnight, and the show was exactly that. The people who watch it now, on streaming platforms at whatever hour they happen to need it, are finding the same thing. The patterns are the company. The patterns are the presence. The patterns are the reason the house on Spooner Street keeps its lights on. Additional section. The cast changes, and what they reveal. Long-running shows accumulate cast changes the way long-lived institutions accumulate turnover in personnel. The people who were there at the beginning are not always there at the end, and the people who came later brought their own qualities to roles that were already established, with results that range from seamless to jarring. Meg Griffin had two voices before settling into the one that most people know. Lacey Chabert voiced the character through the first season, and her version of Meg had a slightly different quality from Mila Kunis's eventual take, a bit softer, a bit younger sounding, less able to sustain the world weariness that the character would develop across subsequent seasons. Chabert left because of scheduling conflicts with Party of Five, where she was also working, and with her academic commitments at the time. The transition to Kunis happened at the beginning of the second season, and it is seamless enough that most viewers who encountered the show for the first time in the second season or later would not know it had happened. The Cleveland Brown recasting in 2020 was more publicly noted because it happened in a specific cultural moment and for specific cultural reasons. Mike Henry, who is white, had been voicing Cleveland Brown, who is black, for the entire run of the show up to that point, 18 seasons. Henry announced his departure from the role himself. framing it as a recognition that the time had come for the character to be voiced by a black performer. Arif Zahir, who took over the role, brought a different quality to the character, and the transition required an adjustment for viewers who had spent 18 years associating Cleveland's voice with Henry's specific take on it. These cast changes are instructive because they reveal something about the relationship between voice and character in animation. In live-action television, a recast is almost always conspicuous. A new face attached to a familiar name is immediately apparent to any viewer who has been paying attention. In animation, a recast is potentially invisible because the face remains the same. The character looks identical, only the voice has changed, and voices are less visually dramatic than faces. The audience adapts more easily, even when the change is significant. What remains is the character as the show has defined them through writing and design, independent of the specific person providing the sound. This is one of the reasons animated shows can sustain themselves for longer than live-action shows in a specific way. The characters do not age. The faces do not change. The show can theoretically run indefinitely as long as voice performers can be found and as long as there is an audience willing to watch. Family Guy is approaching 30 years on the air, and the animated Griffin family looks essentially the same as they did in the 1999 pilot. No one has aged, no one has visibly grown. The only changes are in the voices and in the writing, both of which have shifted across the decades in ways that have been more or less visible depending on how closely you have been paying attention. The voice that has remained most consistent throughout the show's entire run is MacFarlane's. He voices Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire across every season. And while his performances in these roles have evolved, Peter's stupidity has been pushed to different extremes at different points. Brian's self-regard has grown and contracted. Stewie's menace has been replaced by something warmer. The fundamental vocal identity of each character has remained his. The show's creative leadership has changed. The writing room has turned over multiple times. But the sounds that the audience identifies most strongly with the show, the specific quality of Peter's laugh and Stewie's enunciation and Brian's slightly world-weary delivery, have remained continuous because the person producing them has remained continuous. This is part of what creates the specific kind of familiarity that Family Guy generates in long-term viewers. The voices they know are the actual voices of the actual person who created the show. When you watch Peter Griffin say something, you are hearing, in however mediated a form, the voice of the man who invented the character, playing a character who was originally built from the voice of a stranger he overheard in a school building. The creation has its creator inside it at every point of its existence. Additional section: what the show predicted and what it got wrong. Family Guy has occasionally made jokes that landed years later in the vicinity of things that actually happened. The show's habit of dark and specific comedy about taboo subjects, combined with its long run and its enormous number of episodes, means that some percentage of its jokes were always going to age in unexpected ways. The Kevin Spacey joke from the 4th season, in which Stewie runs through a mall shouting about having escaped from a specific basement, is the most cited example. The joke was written as random absurdist comedy. It aired in 2005. More than a decade later, Spacey became the subject of allegations that gave the joke a retrospective specificity that its writers absolutely could not have intended. Seth MacFarlane confirmed publicly that the joke was random, that it bore no relationship to any specific knowledge about Spacey, and that the coincidence was genuinely coincidental. The show has made similar jokes about other subjects that did not age in the same way, which suggests that the Spacey coincidence was exactly that. A coincidence that gained its apparent prescience from the sheer volume of jokes the show has produced across 25 years. When you make enough jokes about enough subjects, some percentage of them will be in the general vicinity of things that subsequently happen in the real world. This is not prediction, this is probability. What the show has genuinely gotten consistently wrong is the assumption that its darkest and most extreme comedic choices would remain provocative across time. Comedy about taboo subjects depends for some of its impact on the taboo status of the subject. When the taboo erodes, when the thing you are making jokes about becomes something that has genuinely hurt real people, or becomes something the broader culture has decided to engage with more seriously, the comedy built around it does not automatically update itself. It sits in its episode, in its original context, as an artifact of when it was made and what was funny then. Some of the show's early humor has aged well because the targets were ideas rather than people, or because the shock of the original joke was more about the show's willingness to go there than about the thing it went there to discuss. Some of it has aged poorly because the targets were people, or because the show's willingness to go there has been outpaced by the reality of how much damage the going there actually caused. The show's writers are, by most accounts, aware of this. The addition of more women to the writing staff that the show's notes suggest happened around season 15 and onward is credited by some analysts with the partial reduction in the most extreme treatment of Meg Griffin. A writing room that includes people who can say, "I recognize what this is doing" from a position of personal familiarity is a writing room that will make different choices than one that does not include those people. The choices became different, not entirely different, not unrecognizable, but different. This is not a redemption arc, exactly. The show did not acknowledge what it had done and commit to a transformation. It drifted, as shows drift, in response to changing sensibilities and changing personnel, and some of what had been among its worst habits simply became less frequent without anyone formally deciding that it was wrong. Whether that counts as growth or as coincidence is a question about intentions that the show's history cannot definitively answer. What it can answer is that the show kept going. Across all of this, the things that aged well and the things that did not, the moments of genuine craft and the moments of genuine laziness, the periods of creative vitality and the long valleys of what are we even doing, the show kept going. The house stayed on its corner, the patterns persisted, and the audience, reduced but still present, kept finding something in it that justified returning. Additional section. The music numbers that earned their place. There is a moment in the season 4 episode Patriot Games where Peter Griffin is playing for the New England Patriots football team. The show's plotting has always been generous with its premises, and he celebrates a touchdown by launching into a full production number from The Music Man, the 1957 Meredith Willson musical. The song is Shipoopi. The performance is elaborately choreographed. The other players participate. The crowd in the stadium participates. The sequence goes on for what feels like longer than any football game celebration has any right to go on. And it is one of the funniest things in the show's entire run, not because the song is inherently funny. Shipoopi is a real song from a real beloved musical, but because the commitment is so complete, so earnest, so devoid of irony about the absurdity of what is happening, that the comedy comes from the sincerity rather than from any wink at the audience. This is MacFarlane's musical sensibility at work. He has been public about his genuine love for the American songbook, for the Broadway musical tradition, for big band jazz and the orchestral pop arrangements of the mid-20th century. He has released albums of this material performed by himself, with full orchestration, and the albums are not exercises in irony. They are expressions of genuine admiration for a form he finds beautiful. This sincerity about musical theater and big band is what makes the show's production numbers land differently from how they would if they were just parody. When Shipoopi plays during a football game, it is not a joke about how silly musicals are. It is a sincere performance of a real song in a context that should not contain it, and the comedy comes from the collision between the sincere performance and the absurd context. The song itself is treated with respect. The absurdity is entirely situational. This is harder to do than it looks, and it explains why Family Guy's musical numbers have consistently been more successful than its competitors' attempts at the same genre. The barbershop quartet that delivers an AIDS diagnosis in the season 4 episode The Cleveland Loretta Quagmire works by the same principle. The song You Have AIDS, which the quartet performs in 4-part harmony with period-appropriate vocal blending, is musically skilled. The barbershop arrangement is genuine. The horror of the content delivered through the beauty of the form is where the joke lives. Strip out the musical quality, and you have a crude joke about disease. Keep the musical quality, and you have a piece of comedy that is deeply wrong and technically impressive at the same time, which is where the best of this show's dark humor has always lived. The Christmas Time is Killing Us song that earned the Grammy nomination in 2012 is the most emotionally complete of these numbers. It begins as a production number about the frantic cruelty of Christmas preparation, the impossible logistics, the commercial pressure, the exhaustion, and it gradually deepens into something genuinely bleak about the way the holiday season creates a mandatory demand for joy that the people required to produce it often do not feel. The melody is gorgeous. The orchestration is lush. The lyrics are sharp and funny and increasingly desperate. By the end of the song, you have received both a genuine musical gift and a small meditation on what it costs to provide magic for people who expect it without considering the cost. Ron Jones received a Grammy nomination for that song, a Grammy nomination for a number from an animated television comedy. This is the kind of achievement that gets lost in discussions of Family Guy that focus on the show's worst tendencies rather than its best ones. The show produced a Grammy-nominated song. The show produced Emmy-winning music. The show, in its best musical moments, demonstrated a sophistication about the form that its reputation for crude shock comedy did not always credit. The musical tradition that runs through Family Guy is one of the show's most consistent points of genuine quality, and it is one that persists through the creative fluctuations of the rest of the production, because the composers, Jones and Murphy, across the first 12 seasons, their successors after that were given the resources and the time to do their work properly. The 60-piece orchestra that plays every episode is the most extravagant investment in quality that the show has consistently maintained, and it is the investment that pays off most reliably in terms of distinguishing the show from its peers. Additional section: the patterns that the patterns make. We have been tracing individual patterns throughout this video. The chicken fight pattern, the gag return pattern, the death and resurrection pattern, the hidden message pattern, the musical number pattern. But there is something interesting that happens when you pull back far enough to look at all these patterns at once, and that is the pattern of the patterns themselves. Every pattern in Family Guy shares a specific quality. It returns, but it does not return identically. The chicken fights escalate. The running gags vary their execution while maintaining their structure. The deaths and resurrections take different forms. The Easter eggs address different subjects. The musical numbers tackle different styles and different emotional registers. Each repetition of a pattern is recognizable as part of the pattern while being distinguishable from every previous instance of it. This is the formal structure of comedy as a discipline. Comedy depends on the combination of the familiar and the unexpected. Too much familiarity and you have boredom. Too much unexpectedness and you have confusion rather than comedy. The running gag solves this problem by providing the familiar structure while varying the specific content within that structure. You know a chicken fight is coming. You do not know exactly what this chicken fight will do. The knowing and the not knowing exist simultaneously, and the pleasure is in both of them. What Family Guy learned, across its long run, was how to build patterns that could sustain this combination of familiarity and variation for extraordinary lengths of time. The chicken fight pattern ran for 25 years and produced enough distinct instances to justify the repetition. The road to pattern ran for more than 15 years and found new territories to explore within its established format. The musical number pattern has run the entire life of the show, finding new genres and new emotional registers to work within. This is not a simple accomplishment. Pattern building of this kind requires both the discipline to maintain the structural constraints that make the pattern recognizable and the creativity to find new content within those constraints. The shows that do it well, and Family Guy has done it well more often than its critics acknowledge, are shows that have internalized the basic grammar of comedy deeply enough to improvise fluently within it. The patterns that the show built in its first 3 seasons were the grammar. Everything that came afterward was the improvisation within that grammar. When the improvisation was good, you got the Road to the Multiverse, and Brian and Stewie, and the Star Wars specials, and the Grammy-nominated Christmas song. When the improvisation was lazy, you got the Conway Twitty sequences, and the elongated gross-out humor, and the character work that did not serve anyone involved. Both kinds of improvisation were done within the same grammar. Both kinds of episodes were part of the same show. And the grammar held even when the improvisation failed, because the grammar was built into the structure deeply enough to persist through the fluctuations of the content. The house remained the house. The pattern remained the pattern. The show remained recognizably itself even when it was not at its best, which is part of what made people keep coming back to it even when it had disappointed them. This is the pattern of the patterns. The show maintains its identity through structural consistency, even when the content within that structure is not earning the identity it is borrowing. It is a peculiar kind of integrity, not the integrity of always being good, but the integrity of always being the same kind of thing, which in the specific circumstance of a long-running show with a loyal audience turns out to be sufficient to sustain a relationship across decades. The viewers who are watching Family Guy now know the grammar. They learned it years ago. When they watch a new episode, they are not approaching it as new readers approaching a new text. They are readers who know the language returning to a text written in that language. And even when the text is not particularly interesting, the act of reading in a language you know well is its own form of comfort. Family Guy is a language now. It has been a language for a long time, and languages persist because the people who speak them keep speaking them, keep teaching them to new people, keep finding that the language contains what they need to say. The house on Spooner Street is where the language is spoken. The patterns are its grammar. The rest is improvisation. And all of it, the great improvisations and the mediocre ones and the ones that probably should not have been attempted, is Family Guy. And Family Guy has been on the air for 25 years, and the eye keeps opening, and the story keeps going, and the lights in the house stay on. Additional section. 25 years of the same opening theme. There is a song that millions of people know by heart, even if they have never consciously learned it. The Family Guy theme is one of the most recognizable pieces of music in American television history. It begins with a brief orchestral introduction, moves into a vaudeville-style verse sung by the male lead character, continues with an elaborate family production number in the tradition of old television variety shows, and ends with the entire cast assembled for a kind of choreographed curtain call that promises the audience something cheerful and antic is about to happen. Walter Murphy composed the main theme, and the composition draws deliberately on the musical vocabulary of classic American family television entertainment. The style is warm and theatrical in the manner of 1960s television specials, the kind of thing that families would gather in their living rooms to watch on Saturday nights before cable fragmented the viewing audience into 1,000 different streams. The theme promises a specific kind of pleasure, the pleasure of the group entertainment spectacle, of the whole family in front of the screen, of something designed to make everyone smile simultaneously. This promise is immediately and consistently betrayed by everything that follows, which is a significant part of why the theme works as well as it does. The cheerful and wholesome opening prepares you for cheerful and wholesome and then delivers something considerably darker and more complicated. The contrast is the joke. The theme is the setup, and every episode that follows is the punchline. But the theme has also done something else. Over 25 years of airing, it has become a Pavlovian signal for a specific kind of relaxed anticipation. People who have watched the show for a long time report that hearing the opening bars of the theme produces an immediate physical response of something like comfort, the muscles in the shoulders relax slightly, the brain shifts into a lower gear of attention, the body prepares for the specific kind of television experience it associates with what follows. This is conditioning accumulated through thousands of repetitions. You have heard this theme enough times that your nervous system has learned to expect a specific kind of experience when it hears it, and the expectation itself becomes pleasurable before a single frame of the episode has played. This is the deepest pattern of all, deeper even than the chicken fight, or the running gags, or the structural commitment to return. It is the pattern that lives in the body, rather than in the mind. It is the pattern that was built not through creative intention but through pure repetition over time. And it is the pattern that will persist longest after everything else has changed, because bodily memory is more durable than cognitive memory, and the response to the opening bars of the Family Guy theme will continue to relax the shoulders of a very large number of people long after they could tell you what any specific episode was about. The house is always there because the theme is always there. And the theme is always there because it has been there long enough to become part of the nervous system of the people who have been watching. That is what 25 years of a television show actually produces, in the end. Not just episodes, not just cultural references, not just a giant immortal chicken and a baby who created the universe, and a dog who kept trying to write something real. It produces, in the people who watched it, a set of reflexes, a set of expectations, a set of responses to specific sounds and images and patterns that have been rehearsed so many times they no longer require conscious activation. Family Guy is in the bodies of the people who watched it. The patterns are in there, doing their quiet work, producing their specific quality of comfort whenever the theme plays and the house on Spooner Street appears on the screen. That is the most enduring thing a show can become. Not acclaimed, not beloved in the way that critical favorites are beloved, but embedded in the literal nervous system sense in the lives of the people who chose to spend time with it. The eye will open again. A final note on watching and returning. One more thing, because we are almost at the end of this and there is one more thing worth saying. The act of watching a television show for 25 years is not a passive act, even when it feels like one. It is not simply consuming content. It is participating in an ongoing relationship with a piece of storytelling that has been made by real people with real intentions and real limitations. A piece of storytelling that has changed, and you have changed, and the changes in both of you have happened in parallel without either of you necessarily being fully aware of how much has shifted. When you watch an episode of Family Guy from 1999 today, you are bringing everything that has happened between 1999 and now to that viewing. Every episode you have seen since then. Every joke you have heard since then. Every cultural change that has made some of the humor land differently than it would have landed in the moment of its original airing. The 1999 episode has not changed. You have changed. The encounter between you and the episode is different because of that. And that difference is part of what makes revisiting old episodes of a long-running show such a particular and peculiar experience. The patterns we have explored in this video, the chicken, the gags, the hidden messages, the music, the cosmology, the multiverse, the resurrections, the voices, the theme are stable. They are in the episodes where they are, and they will be there whenever you go back to look. But what they mean to you, what you feel when you encounter them, how they land in the specific context of your life when you are watching, all of that is variable. All of that changes with you. This is what it means to have watched something long enough. The show becomes a kind of diary, written in someone else's language, that you can read differently at different points in your life. The episodes you found funniest at one age are not always the episodes you find most meaningful at another. The characters you related to most strongly when you were younger are not always the ones who seem most recognizable now. The jokes that shocked you in 1999 may seem mild today. The ones that seemed casual then may have accumulated weight in the years since. Family Guy has given you a lot of moments to feel something. Not all of them were earned in the traditional sense of narrative craft. But all of them happened, and they happened in the specific circumstances of specific times in specific lives, and the accumulated weight of that experience is part of what makes the house on Spooner Street feel like a place you know. Go back to it whenever you need it. It will be there, the patterns will be there, the lights in the house will be on, because they have been on for 25 years, and there is no particular reason they should go out now. Thank you for spending this time here. If this landed in a way you did not expect, or gave you something to think about the next time you put on an episode late at night, that is exactly what it was for. Drop a comment and tell me what you think. Or just tell me what time it is where you are and whether you are still awake. Either one is good. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of thing. Take care of yourselves. The eye opens.